Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
We're live. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the General Issues Committee budget meeting for November 21st, 2023. I'm calling this meeting to order. A reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during committee meetings. In chambers this morning, we have Councillor Beattie, Councillor Wang, Councillor Kretsch, Mayor Horvath, Councillor McMeekin, Councillor Alex Wilson, and online joining us is Councillor Clark, Councillor Pauls, and Councillor Francis. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to today's agenda?
Mr. Chair, there is not any changes to the agenda, but note that there is an added finance presentation for item 5.1.
Thank you. Are there any declarations of interest this morning? Oh, sorry. Thank you. Mover and a seconder to approve the agenda. Moved by Councillor Kretsch, seconded by Councillor Beattie. Mine said no this morning already too.
Thank you.
That carries unanimously. Now, are there any declarations of interest this morning? I'm not seeing anyone. So moving on to our staff presentations. So just before we jump into the presentation, I was wondering if we could just perhaps set a few ground rules expectations for the budget meetings. I'm going to hold you to the 5-minute time limit of question and answer. So please be careful of when you ask a question. If you really need to ask that question, you can always go on the speakers list multiple times. Most of these budgets have the presentation and then the report. So if there's questions on the presentation, we'll deal with those first. So try to keep your questions on the presentation, comments and discussion on the actual report. And just a quick notice about motions, or if there is any direction that comes out of the staff presentation or the report, if we're dealing with the item in the meeting, obviously the motion would have to go on the table then, but the option for notice of motion is always available as well. And it might be easier and cleaner to go to notice of motion and deal with the actual direction at the following meeting. And I think that's it. So we're going to jump in with our staff presentation. This is the item 5.1, the 2024 recommended water, wastewater, storm rated supported budget. Nick Winters, the Director of Hamilton Water, will provide the first portion of the presentation. There are two halves to this presentation. There's the water component, and then there's the financial component that's presented by Brian McMullen. So if you have financial questions, they will be on the financial component. Questions for water specifically will be on the first half. We'll open up for questions in between. Nick, welcome. Sorry, Director Winters.
Is this thing on? There it is. Yes, it is. Okay. Thank you very much, Chair Danko. So I'll say good morning. Welcome, Mayor Horvath, members of council. I'm Nick Winters, Director for the Hamilton Water Division. And today I am presenting the recommended 2024 water, wastewater, and stormwater rate budget. Before I jump into it, I do want to mention, I do have a number of slides. My presentation is going to take about an hour, just so you're aware of timing. And I will ask General Manager Kan if he has any words of introduction before I get started.
Through the chair, thank you very much for that, Nick. General Manager Carlisle Kan for Public Works, under which Hamilton Water sits. I can assure committee and council that staff have been working very diligently with our corporate partners, finance, and we recognize the pressures that this budget brings and I guess the whole affordability question with regards to where we're going. I can assure you that we've worked hard on it. and we look forward to, I guess, receiving Nick's presentation and the questions that may come from it. Thank you.
Thank you. And so to make sure that everyone's on the same page, anytime this morning that I refer to the rate budget, we're talking about the water and sewer budget that it's funded from storm fees and charges on the community's water bills. It's always an honor to present all the great, to represent all the great people within Hamilton Water and the excellent results that they deliver in support of our community, some of which you're going to hear about this morning. Before I get started, I do want to quickly thank Mike Christie, Hamilton Water's Divisional Senior Project Manager, sitting in the top corner. He supported the development of the budget again this year, including putting together today's presentation slides. I also want to recognize that we have the Hamilton Water leadership and management teams here with us today in the gallery, that being the directors and the section managers from across the division. And it's all of those leaders and their talented teams that share the responsibility for delivering the programs and services that are funded from the rate budget. And they're ready to support any questions that may come up this morning as well. And finally, I want to mention that we have in attendance today a number of Hamilton Water staff from across the division. They're participating in our 2023-2024 Hamilton Water Leadership Development Program. So succession planning and supporting the development of future leaders is a continual focus within Hamilton Water, and our Leadership Development Program is one of many opportunities that we provide for that purpose. So this is the outline that we're going to be following this morning. I'll just leave it up for a brief moment here. All right, I'm going to start with the most important details about the 2024 rate budget. We're recommending an increase to water and sewer charges of 10.04%, and that will result in if this thing is, it was already turned on for me. Will result in an $88.10 increase to our average residential water account for 2024, and that increase breaks down to $7.34 per month. The 2024 operating capital budget is $121 million, and that's an 11.6 increase from 2023, and I'll certainly explain why that's necessary during this presentation. The 2024 capital budget is $286 million, and that's an increase over our spend for 2023, but that's actually 29% lower than what we were projecting for 2024 this time last year. The 2024 10-year capital program has increased by $863 million, and that's over the 10-year program that we presented last year. That's due to a number of factors, including updated capital cost estimates for many of our projects, impacts from inflation, updates to financing splits for growth and funded projects, and programmed investments to eliminate the annual investment gap that was identified by the 2022 Waterworks Asset Management Plan. And finally, on this slide, we're recommending increasing the Hamilton Water Divisional complement by 24 full-time equivalents for 2024. And the business cases for those additions have been included in Appendix F to report FCS 23100, and I will summarize the benefit of those additions later in this presentation. So this slide shows the annual increase to water and sewer charges that we're recommending for Council to approve in principle. And this works out to an average increase of 10% per year over the next 10 years. The simple story is that we need to make some very significant investments in the city's water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure. And these increases are necessary to increase our water and sewer revenues sufficiently to finance those investments while maintaining during his presentation later this morning. This slide shows the quality management system policy statements for Hamilton Water's drinking water and wastewater quality management systems. I always include this as a reminder that Hamilton Water is committed to quality management, and it is extremely important in how we operate as a utility. And this slide is just a reminder of the services that Hamilton Water provides to our community across our water, wastewater, and stormwater portfolios. So in this slide, you'll see our organizational structure down to our sectional level. That includes the key leaders for each of these program areas. And as I mentioned, most of those staff are here with us today to support any questions. And it is also these staff and their teams that have been working very hard since July to put this budget together for 2024 and for today. So the next few slides, identify some of the critical programs and services that municipal water bills pay for. So that includes the operation and maintenance of the Woodward Water Treatment Plant that's forecast to produce 74.3 billion liters of drinking water this year. Our 24 water pumping stations, 13 storage reservoirs, 7 water towers, our 4 groundwater well systems, over 2,100 kilometers of water mains, almost 14,000 hydrants, and close to 160,000 water connections and meters. In 2024, we're forecasting the repair of 170 water main breaks, the replacement of 705 lead service lines, and the analysis of over 56,000 water samples to make sure that our community's water is safe. For our stormwater program, we operate and maintain 121 stormwater ponds, 7 wetlands, 2 pumping stations, 90 oil and grit separators, and almost 1,300 kilometers of sewers. In 2023, we cleaned out 3 of those stormwater ponds, responded to 700 calls for spills to the environment, and sold 900 rain barrels across our community. And finally, for our wastewater program, we operate and maintain 2 wastewater treatment plants, 71 wastewater pumping stations, 9 combined sewer overflow tanks, and over 1,800 kilometers of sewers. In 2023, we'll produce almost 52,000 tons of processed biosolids, 6,000 megawatt hours of green electricity. We'll review 414 development applications and analyze over 90,000 samples to support our wastewater treatment and environmental initiatives. We're forecasting avoided costs of over $3 million in 2023 by avoiding the operation of our key facilities during hydro peaks, and also the generation of $9.4 million in revenues from our sewer discharge permits. And this slide provides our major performance metrics for those 3 treatment facilities, including the volumes of treated wastewater, the volumes of treated drinking water, our number of adverse water quality events, the number of odor complaints at our wastewater treatment plants, number of wastewater treatment plant bypass events, and our measures for our green energy production. So this next section of the presentation provides some significant highlights resulting from the community's investment in the city's water and sewer utility in 2023. And throughout the rest of the presentation, you'll notice 1 or more of the term of council priority icons along the side here on slides where the investments and highlights are aligned with those term of council priorities. So starting off with the completion of the Woodward Upgrades program, which we celebrated with a ribbon-cutting event that included our provincial and federal funding partners just 2 weeks ago. This $340 million investment renewed a number of critical process areas at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant and added a tertiary level of treatment for the city's wastewater, which will prevent 500 tons of phosphorus, 6,100 tons of ammonia, and almost 15,000 tons of total suspended solids from being discharged to Hamilton Harbor over the next 10 years. This project not only highlights the city's commitment to Hamilton Harbor and the remedial action plan, it shows that we can and we are making real positive progress as stewards of water, wastewater, and stormwater systems in Hamilton. We've been keeping council up to date on the Shadoke Creek dredging project throughout the year, and today I'm happy to announce that the final stages of the dredging work were completed late last week on Friday. And as of Sunday, the dredging machine was removed from the creek entirely. The final steps of the project include drying the material that was removed from the creek, trucking it away for disposal, and restoring Cage Park to its original condition in time for the 2024 baseball season. I'm looking for a smile on Chris's face up there. The trucking of dried material started today as we work towards the December 31st deadline to have all that material removed from site. And council can expect a formal update via communications update first thing tomorrow morning regarding this project. As council is aware, this was also the very first project in Hamilton that included on-site representatives from our Indigenous partners who were interested in conducting environmental monitoring. And this was an excellent learning opportunity for the city and an important stepping stone on our path to reconciliation. Phase 2 of our real-time control project has the goal to prevent an additional 7 million liters of combined sewage from reaching Cootes Paradise every year. This work is still under construction, as it's experienced some unexpected complications this year due to wet weather and some lengthy lead times for the supply of some components. But the project saw construction at 3 different locations in West Hamilton. And we're particularly appreciative of the Westdale and McMaster communities for their patience during the work on Sterling Street, which had the road closed for the entire summer. This entire project is scheduled to be complete in February of 2024, and I did just learn earlier this morning that we're looking to reopen Glen Road just next week. So this slide highlights some significant operational achievements from 2023. First, the continuation of our effluent quality compliance streaks at both the Woodward and Dundas wastewater treatment plants for another year, which means that those facilities have been operating in compliance within our regulatory limits for 76 and 103 months, respectively. And that's no small feat, given the challenges we experience from time to time at Woodward and the poor condition of the Dundas facility. For Woodward in particular, in late 2022 and for much of 2023, we experienced a very lengthy process upset, which resulted from industrial spills into the sewer system from one of our large industrial businesses. We're lucky that we had our tertiary treatment facility operational before that first spill took place, because that's what kept us in compliance. But I do want to provide kudos to our plant operations team led by manager Deborah Goudreau, who's with us today, for their continued excellent work with these facilities. I've also noted on this slide that in 2023 we completed the lengthy rewrite of 2 significant bylaws, each of which were very out of date. And while bylaw updates aren't necessarily sexy, at least maybe not to most of us, after tomorrow's council meeting, Hamilton will be regarded as leaders in the stewardship of our water and wastewater systems as a result of these bylaw updates. And I want to extend a well-earned congratulations to Janice Takahashi, a project manager in our water distribution and wastewater collection section, for her successful stewardship of this work, which involves so many partners from across our organization and external stakeholders as well. So I've included this slide to recognize the major amount of work that was completed by the Hamilton Water team in 2023 in response to the Burlington and Rutherford sewage spills and the ensuing provincial officers' orders. With thanks to Council for approving investments in our programs back in September, we're working to build the permanent programs that will continue to identify and repair any remaining cross-connected sewers or other sources of contamination to Hamilton Harbour. Council's heard a lot about this story over the course of 2023, including the findings from the Office of the Auditor General just last week, so I'll quickly move on. So what this slide shows you is the 15 environmental assessments that Hamilton Water has in various states of progress at the moment. And this is $6.3 million in critical servicing studies that keeps our water and wastewater systems planning team very busy. Later in this presentation, when I speak about the 2024 capital budget, I'll tell you that we're having challenges finalizing the scope for many of our capital projects due to delays in environmental assessments, and these are those assessments. We've seen delays in 2023 for a variety of reasons, including staffing vacancies, challenges with engagement of our Indigenous communities, and the need to prioritize our systems planning team's time on development application reviews. With that said, a number of these environmental assessments were recently completed or will be completed in early 2024, including the Main and Whitney water pumping station, the York and Valley Road water pumping station, and the Beach Boulevard community flooding remediation. The Ancaster water storage facility environmental assessment has also been mostly completed, but was placed on hold pending the outcomes and recommendations of our water, wastewater, and stormwater master plan. So this slide highlights our Hamilton Water capital program within our capital delivery section, and specifically the schedule for the design phase for projects. And we've got it separated out by our water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. And the key note on this slide is that there's certainly no shortage of capital works on the horizon, and that's really a theme of this budget that we're presenting today, as well as future budgets as we move forward. And so this slide is also for our Hamilton Water capital program within our capital delivery section, and it speaks to projects that are in construction. I've already spoken about the real-time control phase 2 project, but in 2023 we've also had projects in construction at 3 of our water pumping stations and also at one of our wastewater pumping stations as well. So Hamilton Water monitors our capital program very closely, and this graphic that I just brought up shows our project dashboard, which is a very easy tool to view what type of projects are in progress and the locations that they're focused on. So this slide shows a snapshot of the work taking place with 87 different projects in progress, from studies to construction and across the water, wastewater, and stormwater disciplines. And we use this information, which is posted internally, to easily share with all of the collaborative teams that are necessary to make projects successful over years of development and implementation. So this slide highlights two significant projects that were completed in 2023 by our Plant Maintenance and Technical Services section, specifically the rehabilitation of the expansion joints at the Scenic Reservoir and the repair of Digester 3 at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant following a structural failure. Well, both of these projects are examples of exemplary work by our Plant Maintenance and Technical Services team. They're also both unfortunate examples of failures to invest in the rehabilitation or replacement of infrastructure at the optimal time. We definitely spent more to react to failures at these facilities than we would have had we delivered planned rehabilitation at the right time in the asset life cycle. And this speaks to the importance of improvements to the city's asset management programs, combined with the necessary infrastructure investments to complete the needed work at that right time. So this slide has some of our significant community engagement highlights from 2023, including the return of the Children's Water Festival as an in-person event this year, which was awesome, the World Toilet Day event, which was held just last week, and we're also showcasing a partnership that Hamilton Water has established with the Hamilton and District Heavy Construction Association, or HAND, which has resulted in a semi-annual showcase of the water construction industry for local high school students. So twice a year, up to 85 grade 11 students visit our Stony Creek Water Distribution Yard, where they get hands-on lessons about fixing a water main break, operating excavating equipment, and operating and repairing valves, fire hydrants, and water meters. So I was able to attend the fall event this year, and it was really rewarding to see how engaged the students were, but also how engaged the Hamilton Water and the HAND representatives were who were doing the teaching. And we look forward to having some of these students choose a career with Hamilton Water at some point in the future. This slide identifies some of the 2023 investments that were made in our linear water and wastewater systems by the Engineering Services Division. This included the rehabilitation of over 4 kilometers of water main pipe and 11.5 kilometers of sewer main pipe, and also the completion of critical emergency repairs to our Kenilworth trunk water main, which is one of only 2 water mains that move drinking water from the lower city to Hamilton Mountain. One key highlight about this type of rehabilitation work that's noted on this slide is that it's completed without digging up the pipes, which saves an extraordinary amount of money. And as a result, the city has avoided over $335 million in capital construction costs since the early 2000s. And the final slide in this section speaks to work that has been completed in Hamilton Water to save money and to increase value for the investments made by our community. And later in this presentation, I'll highlight that we have created over $1.25 million in operating budget savings in 2023, and it's initiatives like these and others where we're able to create those savings. So this year we've added a section to this presentation, and it's meant to recognize the important partnership between the Planning and Economic Development Department and Hamilton Water as it pertains to servicing our growing city and approving new development. Starting off with a highlight of the downtown servicing strategy. And this is a servicing study that's led by Hamilton Water, for which draft results are now starting to be reviewed internally. And the goal of the work is focused on evaluating the status of available capacity for water and wastewater systems in the important downtown area, where growth is driving significant levels of intensification. The completed modeling and evaluations under this project will identify areas where service capacities are limited, and with that information, we'll make recommendations for capital upgrades to improve our ability to meet the expected growth identified in planning forecasts. In future, the requirements for this type of study is expected to be more frequent, focusing on other areas of the city that are projected for high growth potential and planning the resources necessary to meet those growth needs. This slide is about the pending consolidated linear infrastructure environmental compliance approvals for the city's wastewater and stormwater collection systems. And Hamilton Water has been working very closely with the Ministry of the Environment, Conservation and Parks on these consolidated approvals for a number of years now. We're expecting the new regulatory structure to come into place in early 2024. So the consolidated approvals will provide benefits to the city, provided that the ministry agrees to provisions that don't include requirements for infrastructure monitoring and reporting that isn't valuable, and that they don't limit the city's ability to approve new flow into the wastewater collection system, thereby impacting the city's ability to meet provincial growth targets and our housing pledge. And that final point is our biggest risk, which we're still trying to iron out. The consolidation of approvals is very beneficial to the ministry because it downloads approvals for most growth infrastructure in the wastewater and stormwater systems to the city. But the unique design of Hamilton's wastewater system creates challenges that we're familiar with regards to combined sewer overflows and wastewater treatment plant bypasses. If for some reason we find ourselves with a new environmental compliance approval that requires the city to separate sewers or add treatment infrastructure before new developments can be improved, then there's going to be a significant impact both financially and with respect to timing for development. So needless to say, Hamilton Water is monitoring this very closely and will be in front of council as soon as possible if we believe that the new approvals will turn any of these possible challenges into reality. "2023 introduced some development-related challenges, specifically expedited review times for development applications stemming from Provincial Bill 109. I'm happy to say that Hamilton Water has been able to meet these new review timelines, but it has required the prioritization of development application reviews above other initiatives, such as environmental assessments and servicing studies. Hamilton Water has a strategy developed to mitigate these challenges, and there are two FTE requests for 2024 that are related to this that I'll speak to a little bit later. And the final slide in this section of the presentation highlights the Water, Wastewater and Stormwater Master Plan, which is now on track for completion in 2024 after significant delays over a number of years. And those delays have resulted from a number of different issues, including changing provincial regulations and also changes to our city's growth plan and urban boundary. The recent decision by council to stick to the existing urban boundary will help get this project moving again. And now all we need are the growth targets for the specific areas from our city's planning and economic development team to really get this project moving. Okay, so this next section identifies some significant challenges that are being monitored and overcome by Hamilton Water, which council should be aware of. You've seen some of these before, so I won't dwell on anything too long that you're already familiar with. The first challenge is aging infrastructure, and I've already spoken about a few projects where we failed to invest in renewal or replacement at the right time, which is not providing good value for money for our community. At the Dundas Wastewater Treatment Plant, we'll be investing $15 million over the next 2 years, and that's just to keep that facility safe for our operators and to ensure its continued functionality. But this is a facility that should have been replaced already. And when it is replaced, much of that $15 million is going to be unrecoverable. There's some other examples on this slide, including the Digester 3 repairs at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant that I've already spoken about, and also some very expensive emergency repairs at some of our other facilities. We're also keeping a very close eye on our filters under drains at the Woodward Water Treatment Plant as we plan a massive rehabilitation project at that facility that will be delivered over the next 7 years. So this is a graphic from the Waterworks Asset Management Plan, which as council has seen before. It identifies that the Woodward Water Treatment Plant is graded as poor condition, and that we've been historically underinvesting in our drinking water infrastructure by $20 million every year. And I will mention on this slide that anytime we talk about infrastructure investment gaps, we also want to make sure that we're talking about data confidence. So when you see these slides, the data confidence that these assessments were completed on is at the bottom. And that's important because as we improve our data related to condition of our facilities with more robust inspection programs, these investment gap calculations are going to change. They could go up, they could go down. I'd be surprised if they go down. So this slide has some select photos of various aging and failing drinking water infrastructure, just so you know a little bit about what it looks like. And this next slide identifies areas of the city that have old unlined cast iron water mains. And the short story is that these are our oldest water pipes, and historically we haven't been rehabilitating them at a fast enough pace. Hamilton's rate of water main breaks is 10.7 per 100 kilometers, which is about 3 breaks per 100 kilometers higher than the municipal average. And while not all of those breaks are on old cast iron water mains, a lot of them are. So I hope it's helpful to note that we have increased investments in water main rehabilitation in the 2024 10-year capital budget to help tackle this challenge. And this slide identifies our water main profile by age and function. And the blue bars are the local water mains. They supply water to homes and businesses in the community, while the orange bars are the large trunk water mains that move water from one area of the city to another. And the short story on this slide is that a large percentage of our trunk water mains in particular are due or overdue for rehabilitation. And that's work that we're going to have to prioritize, and we are prioritizing as part of this budget as well. So this graphic from the Waterworks Asset Management Plan is for the city's wastewater assets. It identifies that we've been historically underinvesting in our wastewater infrastructure by $50 million every year. And again, the budget that we're recommending for approval is making significant investments in our wastewater infrastructure to mitigate that risk and to eliminate those investment gaps. And just a few photos of various aging and failing wastewater infrastructure and what that looks like to our operational staff. There's also a breakdown of our sewer pipes by age and function. That's the graph in the top middle of the slide. I am going to talk about that one on the next slide. And so this slide is similar to the water main slide that I showed you, but it's for wastewater pipes. And the yellow color is our 574 kilometers of combined sewer pipe, while the green is the areas that have separated sanitary and storm sewers within our city. And the short story on this slide is that historically we haven't been replacing or rehabilitating our sewer pipes at a fast enough pace. And similarly to water mains, hopefully it's helpful to note that we have increased investments in sewer main rehabilitation in this 2024 10-year capital budget. And this last one is a graphic from our Waterworks Asset Management Plan for the city's stormwater assets. These assets are generally in good condition, but the slide does identify that we've been historically underinvesting in our stormwater infrastructure by $31 million every year. And again, the budget we're recommending for approval today is also making significant investments in stormwater infrastructure to mitigate those risks and to eliminate that investment gap. And this slide just, again, gives you some select photos of various aging and failing stormwater infrastructure and some other challenges such as invasive species and debris blockages that we deal with on an event-by-event basis. So staffing vacancies have been a big challenge for us in a number of areas in 2022 and into 2023. And so despite constantly running competitions, vacancies ran high in a number of our Hamilton water sections. I'm happy to say that things are slowly improving, although in some areas we're still struggling to maintain ground. But more than anything, I mentioned this challenge because it's the root of some of the stalled initiatives as in Hamilton Water in 2023. But I also want to recognize that a lot of our staff have been putting in extra over the course of the year to maintain our services the best way that we possibly can while we fill those vacancies. So this slide identifies some challenges with our capital programs. We've seen a number of requests for tenders with bids that exceed the available project budget, and there are some examples identified on this slide of that. I can tell you that market conditions are stabilizing, but costs, in particular for materials like steel and concrete, are much higher than they were prior to the pandemic, and we don't expect that to change. There are also continued supply chain delays for many components, which is resulting in scheduled delays for our projects. And we know that there will be significant pressures put on our capital programs as a result of Provincial Bills 109 and Bill 23 as well. So this slide speaks to climate change related challenges, but also to some of the work that we're doing to mitigate those challenges moving forward. At a high level, we've responded to two extremes of climate change operationally in 2023. First, it's been a very wet year at times, and it won't surprise me if by the end of the year, we've set a record for the volumes of wastewater that had to be bypassed at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant. That's provided that we exclude years where the wastewater system was inundated with lake water due to high lake water levels, which didn't happen this year. We also had a very hot spring, which resulted in lake water temperatures rising rapidly this year, and that creates challenges maintaining adequate chlorine disinfection residuals in some areas of our water system. And I'll talk more about that a little bit later in this presentation. So this is an important slide to pause on, given the urgent need to increase the inventory of affordable housing units across Ontario. Here in Hamilton, we do have some challenges that we're working on so that we're able to respond effectively to development applications and support community growth. I've already mentioned that those challenges include the impacts of wet weather on our wastewater collection system, which causes all of us concern about increased volumes of combined sewer overflows and wastewater treatment plant bypasses. But we also have a lot of work to do to improve our data systems so that we know how much capacity is available in our linear pipes, both for water and wastewater, and to allocate that capacity effectively to proposed developments. There's also financial challenges associated with Provincial Bills 109 and 23, specifically the risk of having to refund development application fees if review and approval times take too long, and the inability to collect the development charges to finance new infrastructure that's required to service growth. And finally, we're working to develop a policy framework for developments that excavate below the water table in their area. And how do we control that groundwater? And that's something that Council can expect to see as a policy for consideration and approval in 2024. So this slide shows some challenges that result from some other regulatory changes, and both of them are financial. Locate compliance and accuracy have been an issue for a few years in Hamilton Water. In particular, as Hamilton Water's locates contractor has struggled to hire and maintain enough trained staff to manage the volume of locate requests that come in. What's new in 2023 is dramatic increase in the cost for locate services across the industry. And this is a direct result of Provincial Bill 93 and the new regime that's being rolled out for fines related to non-compliant locates. In 2023, this has resulted in the cost for locate services increasing from a projected $1.2 million to over $3 million. And in 2024, that cost is projected to increase to $5 million or more. The other item on this slide is the impact resulting from the implementation of Ontario Regulation 406-19 related to excess soils management. And those new requirements have added significant costs to the city's maintenance programs for our water and wastewater systems, including a total of $1.5 million in additional costs in 2022. And those impacts are also being felt in our capital project portfolio for any project that requires soil excavation, both within the road allowance or on city property. Now, our engineering services division did hire a new project manager in 2023, and they're responsible for leading the Public Works Excess Soils program. And we will need to make some decisions in the future about opportunities to contain the costs resulting from those legislative changes. This slide identifies a number of challenges resulting from legacy issues with the city's wastewater collection system. The second bullet has been thoroughly discussed recently, so I won't focus on it. The first bullet, the challenge with partial sewer lateral cross connections, still needs to be resolved, and Hamilton Water is considering options presently for that. These are situations where a home has a single sanitary fixture, such as a toilet or a shower, that's improperly connected, resulting in sanitary wastewater being discharged to the storm sewer. And the last bullet is about our sewer regulators, and regular inspections of those sewer regulators have identified degraded conditions over the years, and so those have necessitated an acceleration of rehabilitation work, and that work is being programmed by our engineering services team. With regards to Indigenous engagement, unfortunately what we've seen is that the timelines for our studies and capital projects move much faster than the city's work on policy, relationship building, and training for staff. We're also finding that there's a lack of resources available within the Indigenous communities themselves to keep up with our need for engagement in our projects. And that leads to requests to slow projects down, which could create other challenges for our city. There is a great need for staff training at the project manager level and for a consistent approach across the organization with regards to engagement. And there are some great examples from other municipalities that we can and are learning from, particularly municipalities in Western Canada, where they're much further along in their reconciliation journey. So I'm going to talk for a few minutes about some priority initiatives that are being financed from the recommended 2024 rate budget, and then I'll move on to the budget numbers themselves. This first slide outlines the needed replacement of the Dundas wastewater treatment plant. And as you're aware, that project is required to the age and condition of the existing facility. A conceptual design study is being completed presently, and Hamilton Water plans to bring recommendations to Public Works Committee in early 2024 to receive direction on the level of investment that Council will support for this facility. It's already been identified that there are needs for additional lands, both to relocate the water distribution yard that cohabitates that current wastewater treatment plant site, but also for laydown areas to support the construction and possibly for new treatment processes at that location as well. This slide outlines the upgrades that are required at the Woodward Water Treatment Plant, and a design peer review study is being finalized presently for that. But that study has already resulted in changes to the project schedule and costs. The recommended path forward for this facility is to proceed in 2 stages, the first of which will be water quality and life cycle improvements at a cost approaching $333 million. And the second stage will be removing capacity bottlenecks by replacing or upgrading our sedimentation process. And the costs for the second stage are estimated at around $210 million presently. The $333 million in upgrades is fully within the current 10-year capital program, and that $210 million is mostly outside the 10-year program. And it is important to note that when these projects are completed, the condition of that water treatment plant will improve from a grade of poor to a grade of very good. This slide outlines the work associated with the Phase 2 upgrades at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant, and that includes $122 million of rehabilitation work. That's between the rehabilitation of the North Secondary Treatment Plant and the North Digester Complex. The capacity expansion is budgeted at $323 million, and that's to build a third secondary treatment plant, to expand the digester complex, and also to expand the newly commissioned tertiary treatment facility. Hamilton Water is working very hard to improve our vertical asset management program, and this slide speaks to that. In 2023, we focused heavily on updating our financial plan and developing a risk management plan for those vertical assets. But there's a lot of work ahead of us in 2024 and beyond, including updating our life cycle cost curves, establishing costing frameworks, determining levels of service, and implementation of the enterprise asset management software to support this program. And earlier I spoke about the need to accelerate the rehabilitation of the city's sewer pipes, and this slide identifies some of the larger sewer rehabilitation projects that our engineering services division will be programming and delivering over the next 3 years. With respect to communications and community engagement, in 2024 and 2025, Hamilton Water will be developing and rolling out a robust communication strategy to increase community knowledge of the city's stormwater systems, programs, and what property owners can do to help improve environmental outcomes. And that strategy is directly connected to multiple term of council priorities, and $250,000 has been programmed in the capital budget over the next 2 years to finance this. And this slide speaks to the city's watershed action plan, which is one of the identified actions to support the term of council priorities. A lot of work is anticipated in 2024 to complete the action plan and to develop an accompanying capital program. And 2 full-time equivalents have been recommended as part of the 2024 rate budget to accelerate the delivery of that program, as identified in the high-level action plan that was recently developed to support those term of council priorities. This slide highlights some priority operational initiatives for 2024, including our plant operations section, initiating a very important project to evaluate options to improve water quality and stabilize chlorine residuals across the Woodward drinking water system. And the outcomes of that study will be operational strategies and capital investments to support those goals and to mitigate the impacts of high lake water temperatures, which have become a recurring issue here in Hamilton. At the same time, our environmental monitoring enforcement team is also going to begin implementation of phase 2 of the city's surface water quality program. And that's also very aligned with the Term of Council priorities, and there's a full-time equivalent included in this budget to support the expansion of that program as well. And finally, Hamilton Water has been supporting our corporate finance friends and the work with AECOM on the development of the new stormwater fee structure and incentive program, which is on track to take effect in 2025 in line with the utility billing transition. And Director McMullen is going to speak to both of these initiatives in his presentation, but they're both so critical to the future of Hamilton Water, I couldn't stand in front of you and leave them out. So now that we're all warmed up, I'll jump into the budget details themselves. This is the same slide that I started this presentation with. I have repeated it here just to remind you of the 2024 numbers that I spoke to earlier. And this slide gives you the full picture of the rate budget over the next 10 years. For 2024, the total budget is $407 million, and that's $121 million focused on the operating program, or about 30% of that total budget, with the rest funding the capital program. I will point out that we're projecting no increase to the operating budget from 2024 to 2025. You see $121 million in both years. And I'll highlight the reason for that when I speak about our FTE business cases. You can also see that 2024 has our lowest capital spend. Again, that's the blue portion of the bars. Lowest capital spend over the next 10 years. So there are some very significant capital projects programmed, which I am going to talk to you about. I've talked to you a little bit about them already. It is a bit of a roller coaster. The short story is that those significant capital projects simply can't wait any longer, at least not without increasing risk to our community with respect to public health, environmental health, our ability to meet our housing targets, and for financial value as well. So first I'll break down the 2024 operating budget, and then I'll do the same for the capital budget. So there's a lot of numbers on this slide, but really what it's telling you is how we're going from a $108.5 million operating budget in 2023 to $121 million in 2024. And so there's the 108.5, and there's the 2024 at $121 million. The most important number to understand is that our maintenance budget for 2024, which is the very top line here, requires a $10.5 million investment. So that's what's needed to maintain existing services and service levels. And I'll tell you about the pressures behind that maintenance budget on an upcoming slide. That $121 million operating budget includes $3.3 million in enhancements as well. And those are partially offset by $1.26 million that have been identified in savings and efficiencies. So in total, the 2024 operating budget is an increase of $12.6 million over 2023, which shows up on this line right here. This slide shows you Hamilton Water's 10-year operating budget performance. So there was a time several years ago where there were some large surpluses in our operating budget at the end of every year. But since significant budget adjustments were made in 2020, we've seen some very small annual deficits. And for 2023, we're projecting a similar deficit. So we've seen that pattern for a few years now. So this slide identifies the pressures within our maintenance budget. The impacts of the 2023 non-union and QP 5167 total compensation enhancements are just under $1.5 million in new costs. That's the top line on the graph on the left. We're continuing to see costs for our treatment chemicals and energy increasing faster than inflation. We have additional costs for our third-party biosolids facility of around $1.3 million. Oops, apologize, I pressed the wrong button. So sorry, biosolids facility for around $1.3 million. That's the line on this slide, and that's a result of inflation and the consumer price index. But our biggest pressure is with our utility locate program, which I spoke to as well, and that's this line here. For locates, there's been a major change in the marketplace, and we've seen our costs increase by almost 400% since 2022. And so I do have 2 dedicated slides to that coming up shortly. So this slide shows you our largest enhancements that aren't associated with new FTE or full-time equivalent requests for Hamilton Water. And there's a dedicated slide coming up for the employee-related costs at the top here. So for now, I'll mention that we have identified additional needs for our facility security program, and particularly to begin a dedicated high voltage electrical maintenance program in order to decrease the risk of electrical failures, which could cause emergencies or service impacts for our community, and that's this $576,000 that you see here. As I mentioned, we've also identified $1.26 million in efficiencies or savings, and I'd be happy to answer any questions about where those are coming from. And so this is the last operating budget slide. It's a little busy. Really what I wanted to focus on is the blue line at the bottom here. And what it does is it breaks down the $121 million operating budget for 2024 by system. So in 2024, it'll cost just under $60 million to operate our drinking water system, just over $50 million to operate our wastewater system, and just over $11 million to operate the stormwater system. So now I'll jump into the capital budget. And this slide shows you the 9 common years between the 2023 10-year capital program and the 2024 10-year capital program. So those 9 common years are 2024 through 2032. And the light blue bars is what we showed you this time last year, and the dark blue bars is this year's budget numbers. On this slide, you can see 2 things. First, our capital program for 2024 has decreased by $82 million. And that's due to projects being moved out into future years, many of them because the scope can't be finalized until some significant studies are completed, such as the water and wastewater stormwater master plan or environmental assessments, which I spoke to earlier. Unfortunately, as I mentioned, due to staffing vacancies and other factors, we do have a number of those studies that are not progressing on the schedule we would have preferred. This slide also shows you that the capital program itself is increasing significantly in future years. And those increases, as I mentioned earlier, are due to updated scope and capital cost estimates for many projects, inflation, and we have programmed money in the later years of the 10-year program to make sure that we've eliminated the $100 million annual investment gap across the water, wastewater, and stormwater assets. And so this slide shows you the full 10-year capital program with a total of $4.1 billion of infrastructure investment, and it identifies the split between capital spending on water, wastewater, and stormwater assets. And so the water program is in dark blue, the wastewater program is in green, and the stormwater program is in light blue. So this is an important slide because it shows you where the pressure is coming from on the capital budget in the years 2026 through 2030. And each color on this graph is a specific capital project. So the light blue at the very top, that's the Woodward wastewater treatment plant enhancements and expansion. The green is phase 2A of the Woodward water treatment plant upgrades. The black bars are allocations for the flooding and drainage improvement framework, and specifically the outcomes of a number of environmental assessments that are underway with the ultimate goal of reducing flooding risks in the community, building resilience to our changing climate, and reducing combined sewer overflows and wastewater treatment plant bypasses. The blue bars at the very bottom of each column. Oh, sorry, I didn't realize that was so fuzzy. I wonder what's going on with that. I wonder if I go back and forth. Might be a problem with the projector. Oh, there we go. Okay, fixed it. Sorry, the light blue at the bottom of each column is the Dundas wastewater treatment plant. And finally, the red bars beginning in 2030 here, that's phase 2B of the work at the water treatment plant. And so that's the expansion as well as adding additional resilience to our changing climate at that facility. This is a lot of really significant capital that's planned to be delivered at the same time. And the challenge, as I mentioned, is that those investments can't wait. While our asset management programs have evolved enough that we can tell these stories, we're also experiencing the impacts of not investing in many of these areas soon enough. So I've already spoken about the Dundas wastewater treatment plant as an example of that. The other challenge that we're up against is growth. If the community is going to be able to accommodate the planned growth, then the Woodward water treatment plant and wastewater treatment plant projects need to be delivered within their planned timeframes based on our current projections. And so this slide gives you a list of the biggest drivers within the 10-year capital program split out by project. And let's see if this works. All right. So I already spoke about the wastewater treatment plan and water treatment plan projects, and also about the flooding and drainage improvement framework, and all those were just highlighted. Other items on the list include the costs within the rate budget for full road reconstruction projects across the city. So that's the item in blue there. Our many state of good repair asset management programs on the linear water and sewer infrastructure, and they were just colored in green. And the same programs for our water and wastewater outstations, which were just colored in purple. And so finally, we also have a significant project coming soon to replace our oldest and largest combined sewage pumping station on Parkdale Avenue in Ward 4, and that's at the bottom of the list that was colored in red. This slide identifies some future pressures that we're keeping our eyes on. And for the capital budget, keeping our eyes on for the capital budget. And in future years, you'll see budgets that reflect better information as Hamilton Water builds programs to address these challenges. At a high level, we have a number of studies that are being completed, each of which will identify needed infrastructure investments. So as examples, while we have budget placeholders in future years for the outcome of the flooding drainage improvement framework, environmental assessments, and also for the watershed action plan outcomes, we won't know how accurate those placeholders are until the studies are complete. I also want to highlight the Dundas Wastewater Treatment Plant project again. We have $142 million budgeted for the replacement of that facility presently, but a state-of-the-art facility that's capable of meeting the ultra-low phosphorus levels that are being discussed by the Hamilton Harbor Remedial Action Plan partners could cost as much as $250 million. And so we'll be highlighting those options for council when we bring our recommendation report for this project to Public Works Committee in 2024. And lastly, regarding funding partnerships with provincial and federal governments, for the second year in a row, we've built just over $82 million in partnership funding into the 10-year budget as revenue. But there are presently no funding programs to support that. However, we do anticipate that there will be funding programs that will support the city for that level of grant funding or more coming available in the near future. And so this is my last slide on the capital budget. It's here simply to tell you that every year when we build our 10-year capital program, we do go through a disciplined process to rank and prioritize each of our individual capital projects. And the categories that we use for that ranking and prioritization are on the screen there. They're legal and compliance, infrastructure that supports growth, risk mitigation, operations and maintenance impacts and costs, and funded or coordinated projects and programs. Okay, so I'm quickly going to talk to you about our 2024 FTE business cases, and then I'm going to wrap things up here. So last year this time we told you that we thought we would need an additional 13 full-time equivalents for 2024 within Hamilton Water, and that number is now grown to 24. And that's despite the resource approvals that were made in September in response to the ministry's orders that came into the Burlington, Wentworth, and Rutherford Myrtle spills. And what this slide tells you is where those full-time equivalents would reside in Hamilton Water's organizational structure. I will mention again that every one of these has a business case as part of the report that's in front of you today in Appendix F. So starting off with some key watershed initiatives that strongly support the term of council priority for sustainable ecological and economic development. We were asked over the course of the summer to identify the resources necessary to accelerate the development and implementation of the city's watershed action plan. And we identified the requirement for 2 project managers. And those resources will accelerate the development of the program and policy, but also put some horsepower into the environmental assessments that have stalled, and in the future lead some of the capital projects that are identified through that program. We're also requesting a technologist to implement phase 2 of our surface water quality program. And so what that means is more surface water sampling, more data analysis and reporting, and all of that feeds into our watershed action plan and also helps guide some of our infrastructure maintenance programs. And finally on this slide, we're requesting a project manager to lead the flooding and drainage improvement framework environmental assessments, which have also unfortunately stalled in the face of other priorities. And so that position will lead those studies over the course of 4 or 5 years, and thereafter will be responsible for other studies and evaluations at the neighborhood level in support of that flooding and drainage improvement framework. This slide identifies a position that supports growth and development, and it certainly strongly supports the term of council priority for safe and thriving neighborhoods. So over the next few years, we plan to build an in-house office to run and maintain the hydraulic models for our water, wastewater, and stormwater systems. And at present, all of that work is completed by consultants, and we know that over time, we can reduce those program costs by almost 50%. While providing more timely response to development applications, servicing studies, and the analysis of operational system changes. By bringing that work in-house, we'll also ensure that the knowledge that's accumulated by the staff that complete that work is retained by the city instead of with the consulting firms. And so the goal in year one is to hire a senior project manager to fully build that strategy and the resource needs, and then we'll communicate what that broader office looks like to council in 2025 and 2026. And so I have two slides here that detail a business case to bring the utility locate service in-house. And that's an initiative that strongly supports the term of council priority for sustainable ecological and economic development, and specifically the outcome of exploration and introduction of new city revenue models and efficiencies. The short story, as I alluded to earlier, is that the cost for the utility locate services has increased by 400% since 2022. And in Hamilton Water alone, we've gone from spending approximately $1.2 million per year to a 2024 projection of $5 million. That's a significant change in the marketplace that has its roots in the passage of Bill 93 in September of 2022. And that made a number of changes to the Ontario Underground Infrastructure Notification System Act. And most notably, that infrastructure owners, such as the city, can now be fined for late locates, which is an additional risk for the city that's estimated at $8 million annually. That's $8 million we haven't built into the budget. It's important to note that the city currently has 3 divisions within the Public Works Department that are required to provide locates for buried infrastructure, and each of those divisions uses a different contractor. So there is a very strong business case to bring this work in-house, eliminate redundancies and inefficiencies, mitigate the risk of fines, and dramatically improve the service levels for our own internal teams that oversee construction projects in the road allowance, but also for our developers in the community, for projects that are being delivered by other utility owners, and of course by projects from our own residents and homeowners, such as driveway resurfacing, which I'm sure every councillor has heard something about this year. And so this slide shows the business case. We're recommending 19 full-time equivalents to build that in-house locates office, and that includes 1 manager, 3 supervisors, and 15 frontline staff. The year one costs of $2.1 million aren't contributing anything to the 2024 rate increase because they're being funded from a reserve. And the payoff is that in 2025 and every year after, we'll save the city $3.3 million, taking the total cost for utility locates across public works from $6 million annually down to $2.7 million. And so the payback for this investment is less than 2 years. Based on the analysis that we've completed over the past few months, there'd also be no additional impact to the tax operating budget. But starting in 2025, the existing contractual costs within that tax budget would be reallocated to the rate budget to support staffing costs for that locates office. And we would look to reevaluate that funding split after 1 or 2 years to make sure that the costs are allocated properly between the rate and tax budget based on staffing time spent working on water, wastewater, and stormwater infrastructure versus traffic lighting, street lighting, electrical feeds for parks, and others. So earlier I identified that enhancements have been included in the 2024 rate operating budget for new full-time equivalents that are outside of Hamilton Water. And so these are 3 FTEs at an annual cost of $441,000 that the rate budget would fund within the tax-funded programs. So one of those full-time equivalents is for a project manager in the corporate energy office, and they would focus their time on our water wastewater assets to implement the city's climate actions, starting in 2024 with the initiation of a significant energy and greenhouse gas management study across our facilities, the goal of which is to identify opportunities for energy efficiency projects that will reduce GHGs, and projects that will improve our ability to monitor and report in these important areas, which is something we're struggling with presently. The rate budget will also support 2 new positions within the corporate services procurement section. And as you can imagine, as we increase the output of our capital programs over the coming years, there are supporting resources that are critical to make sure that we issue and manage tenders, proposals, and contracts appropriately. So those 2 positions will meet that need and also improve timelines for procurement-related services that have been significantly strained for a few years now. And so the business cases for those 3 FTEs will be included in the tax operating budget submission, but the funding is recommended for approval through the rate budget today, as I've mentioned. All right. To ensure full transparency, I want to let Council know that Hamilton Water will be presenting standalone recommendation reports to the Public Works Committee in the first half of 2024 regarding the Dundas Wastewater Treatment Plant and the Woodward Water Treatment Plant projects. These are both very large, very complex projects that will take 10 or more years to complete, and they won't be successful if we don't resource them properly. And we've seen that clearly with the recent upgrades at the Woodward Wastewater Treatment Plant, which were extremely successful and delivered excellent value for the investments made by our community and by our government partners. So we do need to follow the same model for these other large projects. So when we bring those reports in 2024, we'll be recommending the approval of new full-time equivalents to build the capital teams that will deliver this work. And I can tell you that there won't be any new financial requests when we bring those reports. The costs for staffing related to capital projects are built into our capital project budgets, which are before you for approval today. But I didn't think that would be appropriate to include an additional FTE ask in this 2024 rate budget. One, because we're still determining what the exact resources are needed to deliver those projects. But two, because the budget process doesn't really give us the time to present the details of those projects in a way that I think is respectful to council and to the community. Okay, 4 slides left and they're quick. Oh, sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself on my notes. This slide shows you our projected 5-year FTE need within Hamilton Water, and you see it drops off significantly after this year. And now there's 4 slides left. I'm going to finish just talking about government advocacy efforts and then budget-related communications. And so this slide simply identifies the many different people and groups that we've had conversations with in 2023 to communicate the need for significant funding for our water, wastewater, and stormwater capital programs, with the goal of mitigating the need to increase water and wastewater rates as significantly as we projected. Mayor Horwath has been an excellent advocate for the city in conversations with the Prime Minister and the Federal Minister of Infrastructure, and also with the Provincial Minister of Infrastructure and the Provincial Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks, and I'll bet that the Mayor has been speaking with other federal and provincial counterparts as well over the course of the year. I also know that Councillor Huang has supported conversations at the Association of Municipalities of Ontario conference, and will continue that at the upcoming Rural Ontario Municipal Association conference alongside Councillor Taddison, while Councillor Nan has been representing the city at the Federation of Canadian Municipalities table. For my part, I've been involved in conversations with a number of the ministers as well, and also with the Prime Minister's Parliamentary Secretary and Special Advisor on Water, with the Deputy Minister of Infrastructure Canada and a number of her staff, and also with all levels of the Provincial Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks. We're also pushing our narrative through the Hamilton Harbour Remedial Action Plan community, and we have supporters from other agencies such as Royal Botanical Gardens and the Bay Area Restoration Council advocating for our programs as well. So that said, I'll tell you what I know. We do know already that we have applications in for the Disaster Mitigation and Adaptation Fund, that we received funding to accelerate new growth servicing infrastructure from the Housing Accelerated Fund, and that there's funding allocated to Hamilton in both the Provincial Building Faster Fund and the newly announced Housing Enabling Water Systems Fund. We're also expecting to be eligible for some portion of the $650 million federal investment over 10 years that's under the stewardship of the newly forming Federal Clean Water Agency. And we're looking forward to hearing more details of that agency later this year. And finally, we know that the policy framework for the Investing in Canadian Infrastructure Program 2 has been approved by federal cabinet, and that Infrastructure Canada is only waiting for funding to be approved in the federal budget before making a formal announcement about that funding program, which is expected to have significant money available for water and wastewater infrastructure in Canada. And we believe that we have several significant projects that will be attractive for partner funding through these various programs. I've spoken about those projects this morning, and I'm very hopeful that this time next year we'll be able to communicate some significant success in attracting some of these investments. Our ask is for $700 million in partnership funding to support the biggest projects here in our 10-year capital program, which is a big ask. We'll be continuing the conversation with the Provincial Minister of Infrastructure and others at the Queen's Park Advocacy Day that Mayor Horwath has organized for next week. And so lastly, regarding budget communications, as Council is aware, a number of tactics have been used to provide the community with information regarding the 2024 rate budget including a new webpage that went up last week that provides background information to help the community understand the challenges the city is facing with our water and sewer budgets in plain language. There was a social media campaign launched advising our community that we are presenting this budget here today. There were newspaper advertisements that were published last week advising the community that this budget is going today as well. A media note was distributed just this morning to bring attention to today's budget discussions, and eventually when the rate budget is ratified by council, we'll issue a media release to support that, as well as typical details. The 2024 rate budget will be included in water bill inserts in early 2024. And so that is it for me. Thank you so much for your attention. I know that this is a lot of information, but I sincerely hope it was helpful for your consideration of the budget today. And with that, we'd be happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you, Director Winters. We do have a speakers list. Just a reminder that we're going to try to stick to the 5-minute time limit for both questions and answers. So if we don't get to it, you can always go back on the speakers list. And I do have a package for Vice Chair Maureen Wilson to help with managing the rest of this meeting. Thank you. So we're going to go to our speakers list to start off with Councillor Clark.
Good morning, Budget Chair. Sorry, my throat is a little bit wonky this morning. Can I ask Director Winters, when we were originally told about the budget for the water rate, we were shown a 20% increase. It was 10% for one component and 10% for another component. Now I only see the 10.4, and don't get me wrong, Chair, I'm not asking for us to spend more money, but I would like to know what has changed.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question through you, Chair Danko. You're correct. During the budget projection or outlook from September, there was a presentation about a potential 20% increase to water and sewer rates for 2024. And Director McMullen is going to tell you during his slides about how we were able to take that 20% down to the 10.04 that I've spoken about in my presentation.
Okay, so I'll wait for Director McMullen's response on that one, or presentation. Chair, can I ask another question? And I'm assuming I can ask questions about anything that was in the presentation. Is that correct?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you. I spoke with Director Winters last night, and I just want to get it on the public record this morning. So as we are now transporting the residual material from the dredging, and that the residual material has dried and been mixed, I guess, with polymers to, in essence, seal the material, I understand that that material is going to end up at the Stoney Creek Regional Facility on Upper Centennial Parkway. Can I ask the director if he has any concerns about that material having an odor, given that we've had so many odor issues?
Thanks for the question, Councillor Clark, and through you, Chair Danko. So we don't have a concern. I mean, I will mention that when we issued the contract more than a year and a half ago, our contractor was required to secure potentially multiple locations to dispose of the ultimately dried material that was removed from Shadow Creek. They did have a few options, but they ultimately get to choose the location based on cost for the service of disposal of that. However, you know, the material that was removed from the creek, it has been mixed with a polymer to help with dewatering. It's been drying in the geotubes since July for what is being removed from the site starting today. And based on the contractor's experience with this type of work, they aren't expecting any unusual or noticeable odors associated with the material. They did open a geotube this morning to begin moving it, and we haven't had any reports that there's any issues with odors coming from that material as it's being loaded into trucks either.
Thank you for that. And it's important that we be very candid with the residents in Upper Stony Creek. We don't want any rumors flying around. The geotubes are not being landfilled. It's only the residual material that has been treated that will be landfilled, correct?
So that's a good question, Councillor, and I'd probably have to pass that one on to Director Vanderperk if she knows. I would assume that these geotube bags, when they are emptied of the material, would also be disposed of. I'm not sure that they can be reused. And Director Vanderperk is nodding her head, so I think I got that one right.
And so all of that material would go to this landfill.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, Chair. I appreciate the latitude.
Thank you, Councillor. On our speakers list, we have Councillor Wang, Councillor Jackson, Councillor Taddison, and Councillor McMeekin. Go ahead, Councillor Wang.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, to Director Winters, I'm speaking directly to slide 28, which is consolidating our wastewater approvals, knowing full well that the consolidated linear infrastructure and environmental compliance approvals is being streamlined by the province. What is the current process through water, and how much resources do you need in order to do something like this? I'm also mindful that there's a new ECA compliant, new potential regulation about essentially streamlining the process for any type of water taking from corporations. So there's a lot of these environmental things that are coming online that the province is trying to streamline. How much work does your team do? How much work do you work with bylaw, for example, to keep our community safe from essentially another Walkerton?
Yeah, thank you for the question, Councillor, through you, Chair Danko. So the regulations in their current form, particularly on the wastewater and stormwater side, for every facility that we have in our system, it has its own environmental compliance approval. Every time a developer builds an extension to our system for a new neighborhood, that property or that development has its own environmental compliance approval, and then the city takes over the requirements under that environmental compliance approval when we assume ownership of the infrastructure in that subdivision. And so what the consolidated approvals are doing is they're eliminating the need for all those individual environmental compliance approvals, of which there's hundreds, and they are combining them into just two. One environmental compliance approval for our linear wastewater systems, that's all the pumping stations, all the pipes, combined sewer overflow tanks, all of that. One for stormwater, so all the ponds, pumping stations, pipes, all of that infrastructure. And then we'll have two compliance approvals, one for the Woodward wastewater treatment plant, one for the Dundas wastewater treatment plant. With regards to resources, we're confident that we have the resources to respond to the downloading of the approvals for new construction or new infrastructure. That is one of the key components of these consolidated approvals. What is unknown is provisions related to monitoring our infrastructure. Routinely providing outputs of hydraulic models for the ministry to review, additional reporting requirements, things like that. And we're still negotiating with the ministry about what makes sense here in Hamilton with regards to those provisions. So it is too soon to say if, the outcomes of these consolidated approvals will require, more data analysts or things like that to support the requirements associated with it. We are trying very hard to land with the ministry on something that makes sense, that doesn't add an additional resource burden for our utility. And the ministry's they've been very receptive to conversations. We've had some challenges at the staffing level, staff that are actually writing the language of the regulations and when we're commenting back, but we're working through those challenges and we're hopeful for a positive outcome. I will say that, the rigidness of the legislation associated with making sure we are doing our job as stewards of the environment on our wastewater and stormwater systems, that's not going to change. There's nothing changing on the drinking water's approval side, and really what they're looking to do is mimic that drinking water side with wastewater and stormwater, and that water process has been in place for 15 years now and has been very effective. So all the provisions for monitoring and reporting and operating our infrastructure on the water side, none of that is changing. There is a multi-barrier approach in place to make sure that things like Walkerton don't happen in this province.
Thank you. I have a second question, but then I may ask Jessica to put me on the list again.
Got about a minute left.
So Dundas wastewater treatment plant or water treatment plant, should we get all of the funds from all different levels of government and we actually get this moving, what is the expected outcome of the number of potential water being treated and put back into the community? Is that going to help offset some of the needs from Woodward? Will it start to, because right now we're seeing it's like 4.4 million liters versus 74 million liters. So will that start to equalize if we actually do bring our Dundas treatment plant online?
Yeah. So through you, Chair Danko, the intention is not to upsize the existing facility at Dundas. It is to replace it with a facility of similar size. Now, with that said, I will mention that Dundas it's an 18 million liter per day wastewater treatment plant. Our average flows for that facility are generally around 12 million liters per day, and we do have to throttle what's received by that facility to make sure that we can operate the plant appropriately. So there will be an opportunity to use more of the infrastructure there, but really Dundas it's a built-out community. Without considering intensification, there's no planned significant growth in that area. And if we were to open the door to upsizing a facility, there'd be an environmental assessment required for that. So we are looking at a like-for-like replacement from a capacity perspective. We do have the ability at that location to take any flow that the Dundas wastewater treatment plant can't handle and move it to the Woodward wastewater treatment plant.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Budget Chair Danko and Senior Director Winters. Thank you very much, and sincerely to you and your amazing, talented team, a number of them that are in the gallery today, from management to supervisors and especially your frontline workers. Thanks for all you do. And congratulations on successful projects with the Kenilworth Reservoir, removing the contaminated soil, that $6 million plus project, and the expansion and enhancements going on at Woodward Avenue, already done and still to come. So my series of questions, Budget Chair Danko, and if you need me to put me on a second time, please do. Locates in-house, and by the way, thank you for the preview meeting as well. I believe you and your team had made the rounds with as many members of council as possible. Locates in-house question. So I get the business case. I've always been one that has strongly supported in-house, especially from the public side of services, wherever possible versus contractual. But I believe there's another group, the Corridor Management Group under Manager Lamont, that does locates as well. So if we hypothetically supported your initiative, Senior Director, does that mean that the other divisions no longer will exist and they'll somehow amalgamate and merge in with you? Could you further explain that to me through you? Budget Chair Danko, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for the question, Councillor Jackson, through you, Chair Danko. So the short answer is no. Manager Lamont's group, they do different things. They do surveying to support our engineering works. They manage the corridor from a permit perspective. So if a non-city entity is doing work within our road allowances, then they're reviewing and issuing those permits and monitoring that work to make sure that it's not interfering with our infrastructure that's in the ground within those road allowances. That's just a couple of the things that they do with regards to utilities. When we were building the business case for an in-house locates office, it did involve all of the divisions within Public Works. And locate services are required to be provided by asset owners, including Hamilton Water, Transportation Division, Environmental Services Division in particular. So it's the work associated with those divisions that's being consolidated in one office. It was determined by the Public Works departmental leadership team that Hamilton Water was the best location for that combined service, but it wouldn't impact Manager Lamont's team at all.
Okay, so the amalgam would be with the other ones you just described from Transportation and Public Works.
That's correct.
Thank you, Senior Director. That's much clearer. Growth. I know Council's taken a position, or will further reaffirm, I'm sure, tomorrow, the position regarding no urban boundary expansion, but it's been a roller coaster the last couple of years between the municipality and the province. So when you speak of growth, whether it's growth within intensification budget, Chair Danko, within the existing urban boundary and greater intensification of thousands of units vertically going up along existing infrastructure, and or hypothetically, if growth is approved, going out into the areas of the urban boundary expansion, are you speaking about all of it potentially? Are you concentrating on an area? Not getting involved in the politics of the debate. I'm just asking you, what did you mean by growth and accommodating growth? Through you, Budget Chair, please.
Yeah, certainly, through you, Chair Danko. So I am speaking of all of it. I mean, there's a few key factors. From a treatment plant capacity perspective, it doesn't matter where or how growth manifests itself. We need the infrastructure to provide drinking water or to receive the wastewater and treat it appropriately before it's released to the natural environment. Where that does change a little bit is with our water, wastewater, stormwater master plan. And so that master plan is looking at, do we have the pipes in the ground to move water or receive wastewater? Do we have the pumping stations? Do we have the water towers? And so that will change based on the form of growth that is experienced. And that's where, so between the water wastewater master plan, which will identify those larger trunk system type of projects depending upon the growth plan, and we do work very closely with our colleagues in planning and economic development to determine what those growth projections are and to plan that infrastructure. We also know that we need to do these local type of servicing studies. You know, downtown, transit corridors, this is where we want to grow. I did have a slide up there about that downtown servicing study that was specifically meant in this area of the city, which we expect to intensify significantly. Do we have the local water mains? Do we have the local sewers? And that's what that study is meant to determine. Where might we need to upsize infrastructure in order to allow for that intensification? So I guess we think about it in two ways. From a treatment plant perspective, it's about everything. But once we get into whether we're expanding into green fields or whether we're intensifying, then we have to look at those linear type of studies.
So I don't want to get caught off mid-sentence. Should I close
You're
now?
just over, so,
Second time, please.
okay.
Thank you. Thank you, Senior Director Winters. I'll be back. Thanks.
Hasta la vista. Councillor Tattison, please.
Thanks for the presentation, Director. Looking at your page 64 rate operating budget variance history, from 2013 to 2019, looks like you're in excess of $45 million. And then it kind of tips at the equal point around 2019. And then from then forward, we're about, till now, about $19 million difference in deficit. So that's about a $25 million surplus overall. So are we going to be using some of the surplus from the past to help leverage and keep the tax levy down?
So through you, Chair Danko, the short answer is yes. I mean, those previous budget year surpluses have gone into reserves, and Director McMullen in his presentation is going to speak about how reserves were used as part of building this budget.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. So Councillor McMeekin, followed by Councillor Kassar, and then a second time, Councillor Wang and Councillor Jackson. Councillor McMeekin.
Thanks, Chair Danko and Director Winters. Thanks for your presentation, both today and prior to the meeting. I found it insightful, actually, and I appreciate that. Councillor Tattison answered one of my two questions about how things were breaking out. I thought, though, that I heard two different figures used for shortfalls, a $20 million figure and a $50 million figure. And you weren't talking about the same thing. I just want to clarify that. Those are two different issues. Can you?
And certainly through you, Chair Danko, I actually gave you three, and it was about infrastructure investment. And so it was $20 million of infrastructure investment gap on water infrastructure, $50 million on wastewater infrastructure, and $31 million on stormwater. And those are all capital, non-operating.
Thanks, that's my question.
Thank you, Councillor McMeekin. Councillor Kassar, followed by Councillor Pauls, and then Councillor Wang, Councillor Jackson for a second time. Councillor Kassar.
Yeah, thanks, Chair Danko, and I'll pick right up where Councillor McMeekin left off. I think one of the headlines here is the $101 million in infrastructure deficit that you spoke to. So my question around that is just high level, how was that determined? I think it's important just to understand because those are big numbers and questions would be, how do you know that? And then over what time do we believe we've experienced that deficit?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Chair Danko. So I'll speak to it briefly, and I'll ask, I'm looking at General Manager Kan. I don't know if Director Leishman is on the meeting and may care to join to respond to it, because it was her team who did those calculations. But in short, really the analysis that was done leading up to the 2022 core asset management plans, of which the Waterworks asset management plan was one, wherever we had condition information about our infrastructure, we'd had consultants review pumping stations or things like that. We had inspections of our pipes and rankings. We used that detailed information wherever possible. Where we didn't have detailed information to calculate the condition of a pipe and assign a cost to investment, we used age of infrastructure as a surrogate. So when I speak to the need to improve data confidence, it's really anywhere where we're using age of infrastructure as a surrogate for the purpose of those calculations. As we get inspections completed in whatever manner is appropriate for the infrastructure, that will give us real data based on that infrastructure and will help us formalize those calculations moving forward. I think there was a second question there. Sorry,
Yeah, and through you,
slipped my
Chair,
mind.
just do we have an idea of how long we've been experiencing those deficits for the quantum of how far we're behind?
Yeah, and so again, thank you for the question. You know, I'll have to say, without actually doing any math on it, it's been, I want to use the term forever. That might be a little far-sighted, but I mean, there's no reason to think that we haven't been under-investing in our infrastructure for decades.
Right, thank you for that. And Chair Danko, I think that's important context to understand, because what I hear is as we start on this asset management path, we start to learn, we get data, we will continue to get more data. We're realizing the amount of underinvestment we've had, which is now inspiring the need, necessitating the need for this 10-year capital program spend. And there was the one chart that showed the bar graph, and operating is a much smaller part of each bar graph for 10 years because of the need of capital investment. So I think it's important to understand that context. So through you, Chair, just one other question.
Sorry, if you don't mind, Councillor, General Manager Kan wanted to just chime in on that last question.
Sure.
Sorry, yeah, thank you for that. Through the chair, General Manager Carl Kan. As we go through the asset management journey, not only with Hamilton Water, but all our other program areas, one of the things to keep in mind too is that within the infrastructure, there are many major components that have different expected service life and levels of service. So on the technology side, they may have a 7 to 10 year life, whereas the civil works have more of a 20 to 25 year. So we're constantly going to be updating the data, getting more information. And when you also look at what I would call the level of treatment, when we built these plants back in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s versus today, and what are the requirements in terms of treating drinking water, in terms of treating wastewater and stormwater, those have changed too. So that will also drive kind of future investments too. And what we do through asset management plan is we start to prioritize based on infrastructure needs, life cycle, and levels of service. And in the Hamilton Water scenario, it's very prescriptive. It's drinking water. It's of most importance. And on the other side, there's the discharge to the natural environment. So those are all the things that continue to drive it. And I think really what I want to focus in the question about the deficit, that will hopefully get diminished, but it's always a continually moving scale as we go forward, because things will continue to grow old, things will continue to fall apart and need rehabilitation. In addition, technologies change and even the requirements change, so keep that in mind. But the funding gap is probably easier to identify, but that is a function of the data and our, what I would call the confidence level that we have on that data.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you. So my key takeaway from this is it's coincidental with this term of council and the vastly increased capital plan. They're not related. We just have more data that's become available, and now we need to deal with that reality of increased investment. And my second question, and Director Winters, you certainly touched on this throughout the presentation, I'll finish real quickly, is if we don't spend this money, there are significant impacts. I just wanted to give you an opportunity to sum those up into the top impacts if we're not investing in this capital plan over the next decade, please, through your chair.
Thank you.
Yeah, certainly. Thank you, Councillor, for the question through you, Chair Danko. So as a water utility, we talk a lot about risk. I mean, we go through, as part of our quality management systems every single year, and we do risk assessments based on changing regulations, infrastructure condition, everything hopefully our community would expect us to look at to make sure that we're managing these assets appropriately. We do have risks. I mean, we know that we have legacy issues with sewer systems. We know that based on day-to-day operations of some of our facilities that our teams are doing a great job trying to hold things together and keep them operating. And a lot of times we can fix just about everything. But we talk about the value of that fix, and it always costs more to spend money to do a Band-Aid repair, to do an emergency repair, than it does to invest appropriately in the asset life cycle to replace or repair. So in the context of controlling risks associated with aging and failing infrastructure, as well as making sure that, as we as stewards of those assets are delivering value for the community with those investments, those are the types of things that we're looking to make sure that we control. Particularly on the drinking water side, I'll tell you that the water treatment plant worries me. There are, particularly with our changing climate, we know that if we have significant storms coming in from the east, then we experience extremely high turbidity levels at that water treatment plant. And there's periods of time where we just can't run it and maintain the regulatory requirements associated with providing drinking water to this community. And so these are the types of things that we are trying to make sure we get ahead of as those events become more frequent, that we're able to have processes there that are responsive to it, so we can maintain that commitment to public health and protection of public health and maintain the critical services that we provide. And that's just one example. I hope that answers your question.
Thank you. On our speakers list, I have Councillor Pauls, followed by Councillor Beattie, Croach, Nan, and then a second time, Councillor Wang and Jackson. Councillor Pauls, please.
Thank you, and through the chair, thank you, Director. We all want clean water. Everybody in Hamilton wants to make sure that, and to make sure our infrastructure are updated and to mitigate all risks. But my question to you is, you talked about the internal locate office. You said something that we would save $3.3 million in less than 2 years. My question is, what is the cost to locate this office? How much is it costing us right now?
So thank you for the question, Councillor, through your chair, Danko. In 2024, the provision of utility locates within Hamilton will cost the city $6 million. So that's $1 million from the property tax budget and $5 million from the rate budget. The business case to build the internal locates office will take that down to $2.7 million, so from $6 million to 2.7 starting in 2025, which is an annual savings of $3.3 million annually. And we could only expect that the cost for contracted locate service provision is going to continue to to grow in response to inflation over the coming years too. So we do expect the payback period for that investment to be less than 2 years. After that, we'll be making money, if that's helpful.
Yeah, it's good news. I'm just wondering, how many FTEs then in that office? I don't want to go back. How many FTEs?
Yeah, through your chair, Danko, it's 19. And just for context, that was based on a significant level of analysis around the Ontario marketplace for utilities that are doing locates in-house and the infrastructure they're locating. So there was a lot of science behind putting that number together.
Okay, and that's not including the division that Councillor Jackson said, I guess, Division Lamont, where we have some that do locates, right? That's 19 additional.
Yeah, so through you, Councillor Danko, it is 19 additional. The engineering services division team that Councillor Jackson was speaking about, they don't do utility locates. They manage the corridor, and part of that is being responsive to other utilities that are doing work, but they're not completing utility locates presently.
Thank you. My last question is, we know we're going to save in 2 years, 3.3 million. I'm just wondering, why did it take so long for us to figure this out? Why all of a sudden in 2024, we're going to have this office? Why wasn't it implemented 2-3 years ago?
Yeah, thank you, Councillor. That's an excellent question. So through you, Councillor Danko. So anytime we're looking at service provision within Public Works, but certainly within Hamilton Water, we're looking for a value equation. And for me, value is always cost plus quality. And so, you know, since 2018, we've seen that the costs for utility locate service provision it started out as $600,000 and it's creeped up slowly. In 2022, we were expecting it, or it was 1.2 million. I mean, that was only 2 years ago, right? But what we saw was a significant change in the marketplace as a result of Provincial Bill 93, where the risk associated particularly with late locates and the ability for Ontario One Call to fine infrastructure owners, that has put a lot of risk into the marketplace, and we're seeing that the contractors that do that work are pricing that risk into their contracts. And so that's where we saw, you know, going into 2023, we expected to spend around $1.2 million, but we issued a new tender and we saw the bids come in astronomically high. And so we've extended a partnership with our existing locate provider. We're going to spend around $3.5 million in 2023, which is, you know, higher than the $1.2 million we were planning. And when we think of a full year with those prices in 2024, it's $5 million for Hamilton Water. So this is a very recent change, and that value equation has changed significantly to where we need to do something different.
Thank you. Thank you, Director, and to you and your team. It was a great presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Pauls. Councillor Beattie, please.
Thank you, Chair, and through you. Cost plus quality equals value. I really like that equation, Director. I might use that. My question through the Chair, again, on the issue of the bringing the cable locates, utility locates in-house. Supportive of that. Also made mention in the business case of acquiring 10 electric vehicles to do that. Also supportive of that. But my question, Chair, and if this is more granular than would allow during the question of the Director, maybe this is a question for staff afterwards, you can let me know. I'm wondering if the purchase of the vehicles could have been done or could be done still through using the climate change reserve, as this seems to align with a use through the climate change reserve as opposed to the wastewater reserve. And I cite that specifically because I know that there is an anticipated surplus as we transition from stormwater being supported by the general tax base to the rate levy. There's a transfer, I believe, that's anticipated to move into the climate change reserve from the general levy. And this would kind of like make a withdrawal and a deposit. There could be some ebb and flow. Just curious if there was any calculation as to that possibility. Simply saying, trying to use that wastewater reserve in other fashions, maybe to bring down the rate in some amount, 10.2 instead of 10.4. Just wondering your thoughts on that. Through the Chair.
So through you, Chair Danko, I think General Manager Can wanted to start that one, and I'll see if there's something for me to add.
Through the chair to the Councillor, General Manager Carl Alcan. We are working with the Climate Office initiative on that front. And when we look at the reserve, we're looking at how do we seed innovation? How do we do something different? So typically, if there's a new technology out there that is a low carbon fuel source that utilizes, that's kind of what we would allocate the reserve to. We're also looking at when we do a capital project and we look at the emissions of the not only the project, but also the life of the asset. Are there ways to lower that? And then we would augment the delta from the climate change reserves. Ultimately, what we want to avoid is that if it's electric, then automatically it goes to the reserve and we're drawing from that. What we need to do is start saying this is the new standard and these are the reasons why we're doing it, because we get this much reduction in our emissions and therefore in the future we will budget at that level. So part of it is about innovation, part of it is using the fund in a responsible manner, and maybe General Manager Robichaud might want to add to that. He seems to be okay with it, but we want to make sure too that the reserve is used for what is appropriate, but also to seed innovations. And as we go through this journey and respond to climate action, that funds are available for those innovative and creative ideas as we move forward.
Through you, Chair. Excellent answer. I guess I was just thinking along that lines because we did see some investment from the Climate Change Reserve into the fire department, for example. And just given the tremendous pressure that our municipality is under to reduce increases to the absolute must-have and try to be creative in some of our accounting, I was just wondering if this might be an opportunity to do that also, knowing that moving forward, low emission vehicles will become the standard, not the exception. But in this case, just speaking specifically for this year's increase, if there was an opportunity that it may have some impact to reallocate that funding to a different reserve. But perhaps I'll ask that question when we get into the deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Next on our speakers list is Councillor Kretsch, followed by Councillor Nan, and then Councillor Wang and Councillor Jackson for a second time. Councillor Kretsch, please.
Thanks. And my questions really throughout this budget process will probably be on this point. So that's the start here. It'll be on equity. Before I get to that question about equity, I had wanted to ask if you could just briefly explain the context of the decision that we're making today to the committee. I know that there is more public consumption during the budget period, and so there may be individuals who don't understand the activity today. So what's the activity? If you could start with that.
Yeah, certainly, through your Chair Danko. So the report that's in front of committee when it goes on the floor, if approved, would result in increasing the amount that the community is paying for their water and sewer services through their water bill by 10.04% starting January 1, 2024. And I mentioned, and you'll see this again in Director McMillan's slides, that works out to $88.10 for the average residential account. Certainly, our water bills are impacted by the size of water meters, how much water is used at specific properties, so it won't be $88.10 for everybody. That approval will also include, if it's approved as recommended, 24 new positions within the Hamilton Water Division. And so that's what's on the floor for approval today.
And sorry, just to clarify, in the report, you do have recommendations A through U, which are the total staff recommendations for the rate budget in its entirety. So this committee today has the opportunity to pass that in its entirety, or we can defer that decision to till next Monday when there's another budget meeting scheduled. So it's up to committee if we want to make that decision today or have further deliberations at a future meeting.
Thank you. I really appreciate that context and clarity. It remains sometimes difficult to follow the bouncing ball with recommendations A through U. On that, my main question is about equity. I'll give a bit of a preamble. I think it's necessary. In my experience, talking about this has been very difficult. It isn't necessarily something I've found that the organization has historically been charged with employing regularly, and so conversations around it tend to be about understanding. So in terms of equity for the water system, I'll give you an example for sidewalks and ask you the question. We look at sidewalks when we think about, at least when I think about sidewalks, I think, well, condition of sidewalks is important, and you talked about condition of water assets. How many sidewalks or how much sidewalks in a particular ward might exist might be a factor, but also how much they're used, who uses them. If the individuals who use them are equity-seeking groups primarily, folks with disabilities. There also should be the same consideration, I think, applied to our water assets. And as we go through the asset management practice, I know there's a focus on asset condition, age. You talked about those things, but what I'm not hearing a foreground of is how we're applying an equity principle to the way we understand the assets for our water and how they need to be improved. Where there's a heavy reliance on those assets for all kinds of reasons. So I wonder if you could speak to that and about how the future of this water budgeting will take that into consideration in a prominent way.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through your chair, Danko. I wish I had a great answer, ready to go for you. I can tell you that, equity in the water, wastewater industry is an evolving conversation. I've been a part of a number of conversations over the course of the year about equity and what does equity look like. Is it about your affordability programs to support these segments of the community that may struggle to finance their needs for water and wastewater services? When you speak about condition of assets, is it make sure that the assets are in the best condition that are supporting your biggest water users, which are not your residential account holders typically? Is it investing more heavily in the older areas of your community, regardless of the social economic status of who's living in those areas? And so I can tell you, I'm sure it's not a satisfying answer, but it is a very evolving conversation in our industry about how we add an equity lens to one, the service provision or the services that we provide, but two, how do you build that into your financial structure? I hope that helps. I wish I had a better answer at this point.
My follow-up question is, so when?
Yeah, and that's a good question too, through your chair, Danko. I would say that, at this point, I don't know. But I'd look to SLT members of the bench if when we may want to inject some different lenses into how we build the budget. Carlisle Can's got his hand up.
Yeah, through the chair to the councillor. I think, the question is a great one. And we always build equity into all the services that we do provide. We try to do it diligently, and we look at the information available, specifically to drinking water, where we have a legislative requirement to provide safe drinking water. From an equity perspective, I think we're meeting those check marks. When you look at wastewater infrastructure and discharges, we're also working on that front to make sure that the receiving waters, the neighborhoods around it, the natural water features are being well preserved and well protected. So as Mr. Winter says, there's a number of people within the industry and the industry sector that are working on what does equity look like specific to the water wastewater industry. As we learn more and as we observe or create best practices, because they will come out of Hamilton Water, I'm sure of that. We will definitely build that into our budgets as we move forward, and we will bring it forward to council for consideration because I think, one, it's a good news story, but two, it's really important that the public's aware of what we're doing and how we're building that into it as we move forward.
And if I may, it's a very broad conversation regarding service provision. So if there's certain areas that council would like to see us focus on, then some thoughts or direction on that area of focus would likely be beneficial.
Thank you. Good? Okay, thank you. Next on our speakers list is Councillor Nan, followed by Councillor Wang and Councillor Jackson. Councillor Nan, please.
Thank you, Chair Danko, and thank you, Director Winters, for the presentation and overview. I think one of the key takeaways for me from the presentation today is really about that important context, that if we aren't investing now that further delays end up costing more and into the future. And with that, it's not just a cost analysis, it's also a risk analysis. So really appreciating that very clear theme throughout the presentation. You did mention, Director Winters, at one point in the presentation, something about efficiencies and savings, and that you'd be happy to answer more questions if committee members have them. If you don't mind, could you just overview that a little bit more again? And I apologize if I missed it. I recognize the diligence in this budget presentation and appreciate that perhaps you didn't get enough time in your presentation allotment to speak to some of those specifics.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you very much, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Chair Danko. And so that discussion was on slide 25 of the presentation, which I can bring up if you like, maybe, but I could also speak to it. And really, so I gave you 4 examples on that slide of where we are decreasing costs in our operational programs, one of which was work that our customer service and community outreach section has been doing, looking at water meter work order optimization and making sure that we are not having repeated work orders that are to be responded to by staff or contractors. That's at a high level, and we've identified a savings in our budget of $140,000 since the end of 2021. Our laboratory did some excellent work in 2023. One of the major things that we're testing wastewater for these days is caffeine, as we look for evidence of human sewage in storm sewers and things like that. And historically, we've contracted that analysis out because we didn't have accreditation within our own laboratory to do that. And over the course of 2023, our laboratory became accredited to do that analysis. And that's a $275,000 savings every year by doing that work in-house as opposed to contracting that out to a third-party laboratory. Some other major items that are on there, our proactive leak detection program for water main breaks that are not surfacing. That program has saved us $1.79 million in production costs over the past 4 years. We've got smaller programs. Every time we take a fire hydrant out of the system, we are recovering parts and things like that are still in good shape that we're able to use. That prevents us from having to buy new parts. And that shows up as a savings in there as well. There were some other items built in the budget, making sure that we are recovering staffing costs from capital appropriately, as an example. And so there's a few other things in there too. Hope that answers your question.
Yes, it does. Thank you, Director. That was my only question. Again, thank you for this needs-based and I think very responsive budget presentation, and really appreciating the 10-year capital forecast in order to get a sight line on what is actually needed to be invested in from a capital perspective. Thank you. Those are my questions, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wang, for a second time, please.
Thank you. Through you, Chair, very similar to Councillor Nathan's questions. I'm interested in understanding the non-rate revenues, because I do know that in the next presentation we will have a split between what are the rate revenues versus the non-rate revenues. But I wanted to understand through you, Chair, from Director Winters, are you working on identifying additional opportunities for non-rate revenues that might help offset the rate revenues in the coming years?
So thank you, Councillor, for the question, and through you, Chair Danko. I'll refer you, if I can get my package open here, to slide 10. We spoke to some non-rate revenues that are on there. So $9.42 million in revenues associated with sewer discharge permits, and those are permits associated with industrial, commercial, institutional facilities that are unable to meet the requirements of our sewer use bylaw, potentially from a wastewater concentration perspective. We're able to treat for those things at our wastewater treatment plant, so we recover the cost for that treatment from those customers. Or if they have discharges that don't originate from the city's drinking water system into our sewer system that are making their way to our treatment plants. If they have a groundwater treatment system, for example, if they're using bay water as cooling water and it needs to be treated, that's what those revenues are for. We spoke to, on that slide as well, about additional service revenues, and those are related to permits. And so Hamilton Water has a component of construction permits within the city related to the services that we inspect. We're recovering fees for inspections for different services that we provide, turning water on, turning water off, responding to certain events. And so we have revenues associated with that. And then we have revenues associated with our energy program. And so creating green energy down at the Woodward plant, using biogas to create energy to produce natural gas. We've got revenues associated with that. And so that's where a lot of our non-rate related revenues are coming from. And the short answer is, are we looking to increase those? Yes. We're keenly keeping our eyes on things like heat recovery from wastewater. There's a few leaders in Canada between Vancouver and Toronto that have installed infrastructure to recover heat from wastewater and sell that as a commodity tentatively. And we do have a project ongoing presently that is building a data set that will support decision making for opportunities for an event, a investment like that here in Hamilton. We've also had some preliminary discussions with our partners in Hamilton Community Energy about what a model might look like for a program like that. We're always interested in increasing our ability to produce additional green energy down at our wastewater treatment plants, and that's something that's being investigated as part of our next phase of upgrades at that facility. And then we need to have some conversations about our revenue models. A lot of our fees that we collect are cost recovery based. And is that good enough given where we are from an affordability factor in our community? So there's potentially some opportunities in the future to think about whether we continue with that cost recovery model or we do something different.
Chair, I'm mindful that with increased growth comes increased amounts of pressure on all of our systems. And in particular, I had heard from the director that we were getting an influx of additional biosolids and sludge from some of our wastewater treatment. And we already do have a partnership with Synagro, but I'm going to ask the director, how much more participation are we looking at for other partnerships in the community where we might be able to leverage some of the material that is coming through our system and perhaps look at that as an additional revenue source? Through you, Chair.
Yeah. And so through you, Chair Danko, anything that we would look at from a wastewater system perspective needs to be in the context of what is received at the Woodward facility. And when I was speaking to you previously about dewatered biosolids that are being produced by Synagro, I was talking about a challenge we're having with our digester capacity at the facility due to condition, and we're sending more biosolids to our third party than we'd planned to because we need to move things through our digesters more quickly because of some limited capacity there. But the contract that the city has with that service provider really speaks to them taking all of the biosolids that are generated by the city. So there's no additional market there. What we can do is we can think about opportunities for energy production. And one of the things that Director Helka, who's in the audience here, will look at is, potentially taking solids that are generated at the wastewater treatment plant that are currently not being directed into our sludge digestion and getting them into that sludge digestion to produce additional biogas and using that for our green energy programs.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Jackson, please.
Thanks again, Budget Chair Danko. 2 or 3 questions for clarifications to the senior directors. So, Nick, the 24 new FTEs you're requesting in 24, the 19 in locates, is the 19 over and above the 24, or is the 19 part of the 24? Through you, Budget Chair, please.
Thank you for the question, Councillor. Through your Chair Danko, the 19 is included in the 24, so it's 24 total.
Thank you. The 10.04% publicly, it's been out there the last month, about 18 to 20%. I know Director McMullen, Budget Chair, will get into more specifics, but only because you mentioned you're at 10.04 request. the reduction from the 18 to 20, mostly reserves taken, or should I wait for Director McMullen, or only because you touched on where you're currently sitting from where the public knew about a month ago? Through you, Budget Chair, if that's all right in order?
Yeah, so through you, Chair Danko, I do think it would be best for you to hear Director McMullen's explanation for that.
Okay, that's fine. And lastly, if I missed it, I apologize. Should Oak Rehab and dredging, quick overall cursory summary of the status of it, and hopefully we're moving towards full rehabilitation. And that's my last question for now, Budget Chair Danko.
Yeah, so through you, Chair Danko. So the update that I gave, and again, it was just one slide, is we finished in water on Friday. So all the dredging is complete. They're in the process of demobilizing the dredging contractor from the site, and we're now on to the drying stage of that. And we're actually moving dried material from the site to landfill today, and we're looking to meet that December 31st deadline to have all of the material removed from the site, and then having the site restored on Cage Park for recreation purposes for this coming summer.
So let me ask it in a just quick supplementary. Thank you, and I apologize I missed that one slide. I believe that's what Councillor Clark had asked earlier about the transportation of it. Just quickly then, all regulatory conditions from the province then, Senior Director, will have been met, are met, will be met by the end of the year. I think that's most important in light of the past history. Through you, Budget Chair Danko, please.
Yeah, so through you, Chair Danko. So we've met the deadline to have the dredging completed by the end of this month, with a couple weeks to spare, which is great work by Director Vanderperk and her team. Our next date is having the material removed from the site by the end of December, and we fully intend to meet that date, absolutely.
Perfect. Thanks. That's it for now, Budget Chair Danko. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. And last speaker for a second time, Councillor Tazin, please.
I'd just like to acknowledge Councillor Danko's great running of this meeting and how efficient it's been and how we've all had a chance to actually say something. So thank you, Councillor Danko. Just hypothetically speaking, just for the sake of thoughtful reflection, which is always prudent during these times of budgeting, say we deferred it till Monday, and then hypothetically over that time, I, as a council, received more questions because it's out in the public, it's the 10% mark, that's too much, it's too much. And say there's a similar sentiment from other people because, you know, you're asking us to tighten our belts too much to prioritize. So if we were leaning in that direction and say this hypothetically didn't get the support of council, what's your next steps as director?
Yeah, so through you, Chair Danko, to the councillor, we do have a supplementary budget date scheduled for this coming Monday, and if there is something that council would like us to bring back to aid in the discussion or deliberation of this budget for that date, we would be happy to take that back and work on it and bring back more information. You know, ultimately, we do look for the rate budget to be approved by the end of the year each year so that we can have the rate increase processed for January 1st of the coming year. And I might look to the bench and see if Director McMullen wanted to chime in on any potential considerations.
So yeah, through the chair, Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration, Policy, and Corporate Services. Yeah, I think Nick has got the right response there about any delay. I think if we're going to come back for another meeting, we want to be clear about what information you want us to come back with at that next meeting and what decisions then you'll be able to make at that meeting. We have, you know, the rough math is about a $2.7 million equates to a 1% increase or decrease. So we'll be looking to have reductions of 2.7 million to go down 1%.
Thanks for those answers. So I'm just thinking along the lines also of, you know, you're asking for 19 potential FTEs before we actually start doing the work. I know the work's being done and so forth, but, you know, sometimes there's efficiencies that can be found. Sometimes the actual jobs that we're anticipating don't last as long and so forth. So if there's any room for some flexibility there, like say starting off with 10 for the next year and then just assessing what's the workload of that crew, I would be more than willing to look at something like that as opposed to just hiring all 19. And I know that you've said before that hiring 19 happens during the middle part of the year and you've costed for that. But even still, hiring less than that and just seeing and building it out slowly as opposed to just getting there sooner. My thoughts, that's all.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm sure we'll have more discussion when we get to the report. So no further speakers. Director Winters, thank you for the presentation. And then we'll move on to Director McMullen.
Good morning, councillors. Brian McMullen, Director of Financial Planning, Administration and Policy in the Corporate Services Department. So similar to previous years, Nick has led us through the first part of the presentation, or the directors of Hamilton Water in the past have led us through. And then what I'll go through is more of the finance slides. There'll be, if there are specific questions related to some of the programs, those Nick went through, Director Winters went through some of that, so I will not necessarily have answers to those. There are going to be some slides that are duplicates, and that was intentional, kind of make sure that we're reiterating some of the same messages. So the first few slides are about sort of a bit of a snapshot of the budget, of the key items related to the operating budget, the capital budget, how we got from the nearly 20% down to the 10%, but then also, and also some of the information about the change in the budget. Then the future slides, I'll get into information about specific capital investments, the operating budget, debt, reserves, and some information on consumption and affordability. So when we talk about the snapshot of the budget, we have two components in the rate-supported water, wastewater, storm budget, two components, the operating and the capital. So as Nick showed on his slide, we have program and financial expenditures of $3.3 million for operating, and that's funded from rate revenues of the $295.7 million and non-rate revenues of $7.7 million. So that's a balanced budget, right? It's the revenues equal the expenditures. Although I am going to point out there are anomalies due to rounding. So regarding capital for 2024, we have a $285.9 million rate capital program, and it's broken down between water, wastewater, storm in those percentages, 45, 37, and 18. And over the 10 years, we have a $4.1 billion capital budget over the next 10 years. And as we do every year, we present 10-year budgets to you. In the past, we would kind of try to focus on the first 4 years of the budget, but we'd like to show you the 10-year with capital because of the long-lived assets. So the $4.41 billion is an increase of 8.87 from the prior year, what we submitted last year. And Nick went through a number of those changes. Projects have been moved in, projects have been moved out, costs have increased for certain projects. Now, in the operating budget, this is an actual table from the report, just highlighting the differences between the program expenditures from what we then call the capital and debt reserve financing, and then on the rate revenues. And at the bottom there, just highlighting the average residential increase, and I'll be speaking to that. We've got the $88.10 on the average, the 10.04%. Now, on the 2024 capital budget, the $285.9 million, it's funded from a number of sources, and we need these sources of revenue so that we can have a lesser impact on the ratepayer. So costs that come into the rate budget would be what we show there is the $134 million from operating, and also we would have debt charges. So that direct contribution right now, the way that we've worked the model and gone through the financing strategy, we need almost $135 million from the operating budget. But within that project list of the $285 million, $286 million, there's $56 million of funding that's coming from for growth-related projects. And what we were able to do, this work in progress, so that's surpluses from existing work in progress capital projects. There was projects that hadn't been fully complete. We were able to use funds from those projects and fund the projects that were being submitted in the 2024 budget. And then the remaining three items here are debt reserves and other revenue. So regarding debt, we looked at the financing strategy to come back to the 10%, and we looked at the projects that we could then fund from debt, and we've included those debt funding in these in this plan. And there's some minor funding coming from reserves and then some other revenue. Now this goes to the question that a number of councillors have asked during our councillor sessions that we had, and also some earlier questions. So the preliminary outlook was the 19.79%. We presented that in September 20th to GIC. We also previously mentioned that when we brought our DC exemption sustainability funding strategy, and we brought that forward back in August. So at that time, we were working with the 10%, which was the amount that was approved, the percentage that was approved in principle last year. And when we looked at our DC exemption funding strategy, we had an additional $27.3 million. So that took us up. That $27 million was an additional 9.75% to get you to the now up to the 19.7%. So we've had a number of discussions. We took the mayor's directive into consideration. We had discussions at SLT. We had meetings with our finance teams, with Hamilton Water teams, to look at what and how we can bring that back down to something reasonable. We looked at options, not just 10%. We looked at somewhere in between the 19 and the 10. We even looked to go below the 10 to see whether that's things that we could do. And we also looked at the long term. So not just simply looking at the impact for 2024. We also looked at the 10 years and what those rate increases would have to be in future years. So we were able to reduce, so the number, like I said, it was $27.3 million that was being added in. We were able to do that. Now, it would have been simple. The question was asked in one of our sessions. It would have been simple. It was just 27 in, 27 out. But there was a number of variables and factors that happened because that outlook report was based on last year's information. We compiled it during the summer. And so there was other factors that happened. So if you go to the middle bullet there, so there was an increase in program expenditure. So in addition to what was in last year's plan, there was an increase in costs when Nick and his team went through the process. So there was an additional cost. And then also, so we looked at the capital investments. There was capital investments that were moved out from the planned year. They were moved out into future years. And so what we were able to do with that and how this affected the operating budget was we were able to decrease the debt charges, right? So we had less debt. Debt was moved out. So the debt charges, that's the principal and interest on your debt, that is in the operating budget. So we were able to decrease the debt charges. And then we also looked at that operating budget contribution to capital, and we were able to decrease that by $10 million. Then also, the last two bullets down there, we looked at some reserve contributions and Ontario government funding towards our DC exemptions, right? So we could have funded it completely, the increase of $27.3 million. We could have looked at funding it completely from reserves. But we ended up with those other funding strategies above. We took $13 million from reserves, and then we made some assumptions about the new Building Faster Fund. So it says $4.6 million, so the actual details are $4.55 million. And we've used those monies for the next 3 years in the capital plan as well. So going over to the box over there, so the recommended increase is the 10.04%, and that's on the average residential bill for water consumption of 200 cubic meters a year. So the actual increase is broken down on that pie. So you've got 4% of the increase is related to the operating expenditures, and 5.94% are related to capital expenditures. That's how the 10.04% is broken down. So next slide is going to get into the capital investments and the financing strategy. So highlighted earlier, so we've got the 2024, and then the 2024 to 2027, and then the 10-year 2024 to 2033. So just breaking down sort of the allocation between the different systems, wastewater, water, and storm. Don't need to highlight too much there. Nick went into some of that information. And there is information, there's lots of information in the report, as you probably noticed. Many appendices. We have appendices for the 2024 projects with all of the funding sources. We have appendices for all of the projects that are in the next 10 years. In each of the, by system, so by the wastewater, water, and storm system. So all those details are provided in the report, in the appendices to the report. So how much do we plan to spend? And this is a breakdown then between the years. And the highlights here are the blue. I have to keep on looking over here. So the blue is what is rate supported, and then what is DC supported is the green in this case, the green bars at the top. So as I mentioned earlier, we still have, there still is funding coming from development charges. We are still collecting development charges, and we're going to be funding certain projects. So that's the funding that we expect for those projects in the future years. There's a bit of a peak you can see in 2027 and 2028, 2029 around projects related to the Woodwater wastewater treatment plant and the Dundas wastewater treatment plant. So when we talk about our capital financing, so how will we pay for this, right? So it goes back to, we obviously need the funding on the capital side from development charges, from any provincial and federal funding sources that we can get. But then that leaves us with using the operating budget to fund the capital. So in the operating budget, over the next 10 years, right now in 2024, we've got about $195 million. There's an impact of capital on the operating budget, $195 million. The top bar, which is kind of yellow, is related to the DC exemptions. The blue part in the middle is the rate contribution, so the actual contribution that comes from the water, wastewater, and storm rates. And then the bottom is the debt charges. So you can see that the blue part is increasing over the next 10 years. And this is typical. This is historical as we see, as we have more expenditures coming out in the future. This is a typical trend that we've shown in the past. So regarding the DC exemptions, bit of a discussion. So that was at additional $27.3 million in the rate supported budget, right? So that report that we brought forward to, there was also an increase in the tax supported budget, and that will be dealt with. At the future meetings in January when we bring forward the tax-supported operating and tax-supported capital budget. So this was related, some of these changes were related to Bill 23, and some are related to the funding required for our City of Hamilton statutory DC exemptions and the discretionary DC exemptions. A number of councillors are on the DC Stakeholder Committee, and we've had some discussions about those exemptions recently and what we're going to go to move them forward. The information shown here and what we've used in our forecast is information that we have at the time. So as we make changes to DC exemptions, either way, increasing them or decreasing them, we'll have to make sure that we come back and have them being funded either from the rate budget or from the tax-supported budget. Specifically related to the Bill 23, we identified in that report there was about $14.1 million of the 27.3 that was required for Bill 23. So when we talk about the residential increase over the next 10 years, what will the rates look like? They're, like we said, so basically the strategy is roughly 10% per year, each and every year for the next 10 years. And that's to maintain the capital infrastructure that we have moving forward, trying to close that infrastructure gap. But based on the information that we have at this time and the estimates that we have, and Director Winters points out a number of that in some of his slides and some of his discussion. So what is not in that information? Director Winters suggested that I was going to speak to the utility billing transition project and also the stormwater. So we know that we're in the middle of doing a utility billing transition away from Electra over to the City of Hamilton. We are bringing forward a report on that structure. That is the organization structure has not been approved yet. We'll be bringing that forward in the upcoming months. But what is in the estimates right now is the amount of money that we're paying Electra. So we have a contract with Electra. It expires at the end of December 2024. We are needing that to extend into 2025. So we've made some assumptions in the budget information that's been sent to you of the future amounts. So we have a budget in there of about $6.25 million for Electra. So we're making increases in the future years, assuming that is going to continue, but we will replace that in future years with the actual organization structure that we'll have in place to provide that program. Now, regarding stormwater, we're having a stormwater funding review, as you know. Some of the councillors referred to that. What is reflected in this budget is the needs from a capital perspective on the stormwater management. What will be changing possibly is how we're going to fund that. Councillor Cassar, I think, mentioned that we've had presentations on how some of the costs are going to be moving possibly certainly from the water wastewater budget, but also from the tax operating budget, there's a number of programs that we fund. Things like the conservation authorities are funded from the taxpayer. There's an argument that they should be funded from the stormwater rates. We're having discussions right now, and there's an opportunity, a survey out there for individuals and interested parties to comment on our incentive program. So we have the incentive program, we'll have to come back with a report, and the cost of that incentive program will have to be built into whatever program we're creating. So we'll be bringing those back. So like I said, so what's presented in the appendices and in today's report is information that we know at this time. There's some things that we still don't know where they're going. That residential increase for this year, it's the $88.10. But as you move through the roughly 10% every year, this just shows what the increases are on an annual basis. So when you get to 2023, the bill is over $2,000. Where currently the bill right now in 2023 is $877 annual bill. It'll be $965 if this budget gets approved. So we talk about our debt, and I'm going to refer to our debt. We have a couple kinds of debt. We have three kinds of debt, I guess. We have rate-supported debt, so that's supported from the water, wastewater, and storm rates. We have DC rate-supported debt, so that shows up in this budget because it's related to the water and wastewater and storm projects. So there's rate-supported DC debt as well, and then we have tax-supported debt. I'm going to have a slide on this as well as the combined debt, just because it all needs to relate, and we all need to consider that in our council policies and what the province guides us through our annual repayment limits. So this shows basically in 2020, in 2029, and 2030 that our debt is increasing in those particular increasing in those particular years. Due to a number of factors in this budget related to some of those projects that we need to fund from debt rather than using straight contribution, which would be further increases in rates. So this is the debt charges, so principal and interest on that debt. And again, the top part is the amounts that are funded from development charges. The lighter green and the bottom blue are funded from rates. So the amounts that are funded from development charges are not, the ratepayers are not paying for those. That'll be funded from the development charges, and we fund that through the amounts that go into the development charge reserves. And then on the bottom are the amounts that are then coming out of the operating budget, so from the rate-supported operating budget. So I mentioned tax and rate-supported debt. So again, so we keep on moving back between different sources of and different graphs and charts on how we're showing the information. So in this case, it's only the tax and rate-supported debt charges, not the development charges. That's on the next slide. So the red line there is our council-approved tax and rate debt limit on debt charges. So you can see in 2027 we kind of hit that max based on what our assumptions are, and similar to what we've shown you last year and on a regular basis in the past few years. This is our debt profile does look like this on a regular basis, and we always show that we are going to be meeting this. We have opportunities when to delay the issuance of debt. We have the approval for the debt through the budget process, but then based on the timing of the actual project being completion, we don't end up issuing that debt until later. So that's why the numbers and the amounts just sort of keep on getting pushed out a number of times, because we end up actually issuing that debt at a later point in time. Now, interest rates change, because a couple of years ago we would have had a few debenture issues that were below 3%. So now we're talking around a 5.5%. So that increases the cost of the debt through the principal and interest payments that are shown, would be shown here. So on our DC supported debt, that council limit, that red line is solid. We make some assumptions, and it's based on our development charge collections. So we expect that those development charge collections will change. We just don't know what those numbers are, so we've shown it as the solid line there, just above the $70 million on the debt charges. So same thing in future years. We're expecting that we're then above our debt goes above that line, and the debt charges are above that line. So now when we talk about reserves, the water, wastewater, storm program and capital has these three reserves that we're showing here. There's a couple other reserves that we have available as well that we're not showing here, but these are the ones that basically support the program. there is a water meter reserve, and there's also a reserve that we've had from $100 million that we would received many years ago. So we have that separate reserve that's only specifically used for the wastewater improvement. So it's a wastewater improvement subsidy. So we're not showing that here because it is dedicated to a specific project. So what this shows is that we're our combined reserves, the three of them, and the top one being water, the middle one being storm, and then the bottom one being wastewater or sanitary sewer reserves. So right now we're showing those reserves to be around $86 to $89 million. And over the course of the next 4 years, we're drawing them down. So we took the mayor's directive to increase our debt where possible and start to draw on our reserves so that we can, we can have affordability and keep it around that 10% increase. So the 2028 year has the water wastewater reserve going negative, but the water reserve is still positive around around $42 million. So those three reserves as a combined system are around zero still. So last few slides are on consumption and affordability. So when we have over 158,000 metered accounts, 93% of them are residential. 7% are industrial, commercial, institutional, and multi-res. What we're trying to capture on this slide is that, so obviously the numbers are swayed to the residential, but then when you talk about the actual consumption, the consumption is basically 50-50 between the residential and the ICI and multi-res sectors. So obviously if we can get more consumption and more revenues out of one, then the other side, we don't need as much from the other. And that's something that we continue to monitor and check, specifically on the ICI and the multi-res. We look at and work with the industry and the commercial institutions to sort of see how they're doing with their consumption, what plans they have. Obviously working with economic development as well to make sure that we're aware of any increases that might, any new businesses that are going to draw and bring additional consumption, therefore additional revenue. So from 2015 to 2023, we've had a growth in our number of household accounts there by about 9%, and on the but then we've had only an increase of 5.5% in consumption. So the average household is using the increase is not the same as the number of households. There's a number of efforts that have been made over recent years as far as consumption, conservation efforts. When we look at in this case, we're showing 4 categories. There's a slight growth in the residential. The ICI consumption remains about the same in those from 2024 to 2027 in our forecast and what we're using. And we have 2 other contracts with Halton and Haldeman. And in the case of Halton, we're saying that the consumption is basically consistent, and same with Haldeman. So we have conversations with those 2 municipalities. We have some agreements with them. The Haldeman agreement is coming up, so they'll be looking for some changes to that agreement. So whatever we have forecasted in the budget has assumed current rates. It doesn't make any assumption for any changes in fees. So when we go to the average, we're going from the $877.30, we're going, it's an increase of $88.10 or 10.04% to the $965.40. Historically, what this chart shows is, and we go back to 2015, the blue is our rates that were approved and implemented from 2015 to and what's expected or forecast for 2024. So those rates have averaged 5.28%. When you factor in inflation, you can see that the rates then are somewhat lower. The interesting one in this chart is 2022, because at that point the inflation or average CPI at that time was 6.8%. So in that particular year, our rates went up 4.98%, but the inflation then would have, our actual increase would have been 1.82% when adjusted for inflation. So how do we compare? Similarly, we've shown this similar chart before. This is 2023 information, right? It's not 2024. 2024 information is not available yet. Hamilton provides 3 services, so water, wastewater, and storm, on the water bill, where other municipalities provide only 2. on their water wastewater bills. So we're down at $860. Obviously, that, like we said, indicated that increase. That's going to increase to $965 with this year with the approval. And this will change when we have a stormwater fee. We'll be showing similar information where we will be in a different spot on this chart, but then we'll have to make sure that we're showing what that average stormwater fee as well. One of the things that we participate in is we do a competitiveness study through Brazil Minchell and Associates, BMA, and we provide a lot of information with a number of municipalities. And one of the things that we're interested in and that they like to show is our water bill as a percentage of household income. So in 2020, we're showing where we are in 2024, but the 2022 average was 1.2%. So the water bill as a percentage of the household income was about 1.2%. Our number in 2024 is about looks like about 0.9% in 2024. So we're below the average at that particular time, even though, like I said, we're showing it to the 2022 BMA study, not some study that they've now since done. They do this annual study, so we don't have forecasts. So right now, that water bill is below our comparators. Now, factors involved in that obviously are the particular budget that we have, but also there's factors involved would be the household income. So household income, in Hamilton's case, our average household income is $100,462, which was below the average of $110,043. So that the household income, has a factor in this chart. Now, we also talked about affordability. We've recently showed some information on arrears and tax roll transfer. So that's a bit of another indicator of a measure of affordability on the water bill delinquency rate. So we're showing here 2017 to 2023 estimated. We don't have final numbers for 2023. So we're showing there that there has been some increases. So the number of accounts are the blue. So the number of accounts peaked in 2021, nearly 20, I guess it's about 23,000 accounts in 2021. And maybe that was related to what I showed you earlier about the CPI, right? So inflation was high, so cost of living was high, so more accounts might have been transferred to the tax roll in that particular year. Bit of a decline in 2022, but then right now we're trending a little higher in 2023. So regarding next steps, this was mentioned earlier. And I had a conversation with Legislative Coordinator Angela McRae yesterday about this. So if the budget is approved today at General Issues Committee, she will be working to get it on the council agenda for tomorrow. If it's not, then November 27th is our optional day that we have for the GIC session number 2 on the rate budget, and then that would then go to council if approved on December the 13th. And that is it for me, so thank you. Any questions?
Thank you, Director McMullen. So we're going to open the floor to questions on the financial component, and then following receiving the 2 presentations, we'll move on to the actual report and the recommendations, and we can make a decision at that time whether we are going to proceed today or defer to a future meeting. So on the speakers list, I have Councillor Tattison, followed by Councillor Clark, and then Jackson. Councillor Tattison, please.
Hi, thanks for the presentation. Just looking at slide 10, I believe, and seeing that this year 10.04, and we drew 13 million from reserves, and then next year, or am I assuming we're going to draw another $13 million from reserves again for the 9.95?
So through the chair. Yeah, no, next year we're drawing, I think it's about $7 million. I think I have to go back to the committee report. Yeah, so we're drawing $13 million in 2024 and about $7 million in 2025 and $1.3 million in 2026 from reserves for the increase for the development charge exemptions. And then I might have mentioned earlier too, the Building Faster Fund, we're using about $4.55 million in those 3 years as well.
Okay, and then are we also increasing debt to keep those rates low then as well as we go forward?
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, we're looking at increasing the debt, and then and those debt charges then form part of the operating budget that are then funded from the rates.
Okay, and then just another question to clarify for my understanding. If I look at, I think it's slide 12, no, slide 11. Just based on the increases, like where it says 207 in 2033, have we factored into that equation the houses that are going to be built between now and then that are going to be contributing?
No, so through the chair, what we do when we prepare the rate model and the funding model is we do make some assumptions about consumption, right? So as I showed on one of those slides, that so despite the fact that we have an increase in the number of household units, I think it was 9%, the consumption of those units is not as great as that. So we factor that into our projections on where what the consumption is going to be in the future years, and then that plays into the cost of running the program as well. Like there's obviously increases in water consumption. You're treating more water, you're supplying more water to the residents, so that's built into the operating budget from that perspective as well.
And then just a question about the finances. You said it was about, was it 2 or was it 3 million to bring it down 1% that we'd have to find in cost savings?
Yeah, so through the chair, yeah, it's about $2.7 million to bring it, like for every 1%.
And if we were to say find that 1%, where would you find that? What would your priority be to, or your least, what would we say, affected area? Where could we find that savings?
So through the chair, so yeah, we had those discussions with Hamilton Water and through presentations and discussions with senior leadership team, and we were at, like I mentioned, we were at the almost 20%. So we looked at that, and there was efficiencies found within the programs, and we've highlighted the increases in the report too on the increase in the operating program. So I think we've done what we can do to get down to the 10%. We'd have to, regroup and look to sort of see, are there other ways that we can then, what are the things that we could possibly do to come down to a, in this case, a 9% if that is where council is going. Now, any reduction then this year of $2.7 million has that compounding impact on future years. So, we wouldn't necessarily replace that extra $2.7 million next year, then going to an 11% increase. But then we would have to factor that in with the strategy that we need to look at for next year and then the future years.
I'll leave it at that. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark, please.
Sorry, Chair, I had to find my button there. Can I ask if we could go to page 5 on the slide deck?
Can I put that up, ladies?
Just
So I'm still a little bit confused here. The preliminary outlook was 19.79%. You're now indicating we're actually looking at 10.4%. And that was accomplished through a number of instruments. One is debt and one is reserves. The reserves, it looks like, is 13 million is what we're doing there. And 4.6 million is coming from the new Building Faster Fund. We hope, we don't know, but we expect that we'll be able to utilize that. Is that am I on the right track so far?
Yes, through the chair, yes.
So when we're talking about $13 million in reserves, or for all intents and purposes, those two figures together, the new Building Faster Fund, is that an outright grant to the municipality?
So through the chair, GM Zagaric.
Through the chair, Mike Zagarek, General Manager of Finance and Corporate Services. The Provincial Building Faster Fund is still in development, and the program has not been finalized yet. We do recognize this is a risk with respect to assuming the $4.55 million in Building Faster Fund. With respect to Building Faster Fund, it's $200 million a year, each and every year, over 3 years. And the funds are to enable municipalities to proceed with infrastructure as it relates to our housing target goals. So in the case of City of Hamilton, the approximately 4,700 additional annual units. The City of Hamilton, based on information that's been shared publicly, could assume approximately $12 million if we were able to achieve those goals each year over that 3-year period. What we've reflected is a distribution of that $12 million between our rate program and our tax program based on our understanding of the Building Faster Fund program and methodology. The staff are assuming the Building Faster Fund as it relates to the provincial government's earlier commitment to make municipalities whole as it relates to development charge exemptions. So development charge exemptions is a prominent theme in terms of the 2024 budget. You'll see that through the presentation of Director McMullen and through the budget documents. And given that development charge exemptions are prominent, is the need to reflect some provincial funding against the commitment that they have made to municipalities to make them whole. If I can just break down the development charge exemptions a little further in terms of what's been presented. With respect to the overall 2024 budget, you'll see it reflects an increase of approximately $31 million. And that $31 million is broken down into operating or program investments of approximately $12.6 million, and that was broken down in Director Winters' slide 65. The balance, the difference between the 31 million and the 12.6 million, about $18 million of investments is necessary for capital financing as part of the 2024 rate capital financing strategy. So what does that $18 million tie to? What it ties to is approximately $31 million in total investments. So that's confusing. So it's $18 million of expenditures, but how are you going to fund $31 million from $18 million? The majority, 90% of that $31 million is development charge exemptions. Of that, so approximately $28 million is development charge exemptions. 14 million of that 28 million, half, is related to Bill 23. So that's equivalent to 5%. 5% of a rate increase is the Bill 23 impacts. A further $10 million is other statutory development charge exemptions. So these are provincial statutory exemptions as it relates to industrial exemptions, residential exemptions prominently. The balance, just short of $3 million, is city discretionary development charge exemptions. So development charge exemptions makes up 90% of our 2024 capital financing. Recognizing that $31 million would be a significant pressure, staff are recommending leveraging $13 million from reserves, reducing that $31 million investment down to $18 million. And so to Director McMullen's earlier response to the reliance of reserves, staff are recommending a 3-year phase-in as it relates to development charge exemptions. $13 million in 2024, $7.5 million in 2025, and then the balance approximately $1.5 million in 2026. Can that be reduced? It can be reduced if the provincial government follows through with their commitment to make municipalities whole as it relates to development charge exemptions. So currently we're reflecting $4.6 million. That's about 30% of the impact of Bill 2023. If the provincial government came through with the balance, that would be an additional almost $8 million in funding, and that would reduce our reliance on reserves. So apologize for the length of the response. I just wanted to take a little more time to break down the development charge exemption impact in terms of the 2024 budget. And if I can just take one more minute to further expand on this slide, slide number 5, I think it's important to identify 2 measures that help to reduce our forecast from approximately 20% down to 10. While it references debt charges, what this really reflects is $82 million in capital projects that we closed out to free up that funding. $46 million in capital projects that were closed out, and that funding freed up as part of our 2024 capital budget, and approximately $82 million in capital projects that are being deferred principally because of work that's in the midst of an EA process. So again, just wanting to recap the importance of development charge exemptions as a driving factor to the 2024 rate increase. And again, if we didn't rely on reserves to offset some of these development charge exemptions, we would be presenting a 15% increase in 2024.
Thank you. Councillor, you're a bit over time. If you have a subsequent question, please go ahead. Otherwise, I can put you on for a second time.
You might as well put me on for a second time.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor McMeekin.
Thanks, Chair Danko. At the last, a meeting a couple of weeks ago, I think we talked a little bit, at least in passing, about the province making us whole. And I suggested at that time that it would be helpful to get an update as to what movement, if any, we're seeing on that front. So that's my question. Are we seeing any movement from the province? Any evidence at all that they're even considering maintaining some consistency with the promise that they made?
Through the chair, short answer, no.
Okay, thanks. That speaks for.
Thank you. And Councillor Clark, back to you.
Thank you, Budget Chair Danko. Appreciate it. Don't want to call you a budget boss like they do in Toronto, but you do have the chair. So going back to the 4.6 million, that is the new Building Faster Fund. Our staff are comfortable that that is a conservative estimate as to what we may see this year. But in reality, that new Building Faster Fund, that number should be a higher number based on the realities that we're experiencing with the development charge exemptions. Is that an accurate statement?
Through the chair, generally, I would just say that there is risk associated with this assumption in that the program hasn't been finalized. And therefore, as we still work with the provincial government in terms of how we define those housing targets in terms of measuring units, again, there is a risk associated with this assumption, and it'll be subject to how the provincial government enables municipalities to leverage this funding towards the shared interest around purpose-built housing.
Okay, can I zero in on the use of the reserves in the manner that we're doing? So we're paying for some of our water rate increase to get it down to the 10.4%. We're paying that from reserves for this year. Next year, will there be an automatic $13 million increase on the water rate if we're only using the reserves for 1 year?
There is a multi-year strategy, but Brian?
So through the chair, there's a multi-year strategy on using reserves. So $13 million in 2024, 7.15 in 2025, and 1.3 million in 2026. So that funding that's coming from reserves, we're not maintaining it at the $13 million each and every year over the next 10 years. We're just drawing on it to fund basically the increase in the DC exemptions for the first year. Then the DC exemptions, we're expecting them to be just increase basically with inflation in the future years. So we're then funding them on an ongoing basis.
Thank you for that. And so the 10% over 10 years, or every year for 10 years, is that number including the reserves that are being moved forward each year? Or so next year, are we going to see a higher increase than the 10% because some of the reserves are not being utilized?
So through the chair, so the 10-year plan, we've got in Appendix A to the report, we have a 10-year plan for the combined water, wastewater, and storm rates. So we're making assumptions about the operating costs on what they're going to increase in future years. And then, of course, as GM Zagarek pointed out, we make a lot of assumptions about the contributions and funding of capital from the operating budget. So we make some assumptions about the DC exemptions and about the contributions that are coming from the operating budget to capital. And there's no assumptions after 2027 to use reserves to fund the operating budget. We're using reserves to fund some of the capital program though in future years as we look to use debt as well.
And can I get how much money is in the reserve that we're utilizing?
So through the chair, I just have to go back to that slide. Anybody help me out here?
Through the chair, the balance in 2023 of the water, wastewater, and storm reserves is approximately $86 million.
Okay, thank you for that. Chair, I'm hoping that we're going to have a deferral at least over the weekend, because a lot of this stuff is pretty complex. And as I'm reading through it, in a few areas, it is confusing to me, and I need to have some conversations with staff. But I'll leave it to my colleagues. If they wish to proceed, that's their choice. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Wilson, if you could take the chair for a minute, I have one question.
Go ahead, thank you.
Thank you. Sharing Councillor Clark's concern about the assumption for the Building Housing Faster Fund, the likelihood is that we're not going to meet our target goals, and if that money will actually be realized, I think is a big question mark. But the other question mark and assumption that's built in is on the city discretionary development charge exemptions. So we're assuming in this budget that we are going to eliminate those DC exemptions that are recommended to be eliminated in the consulting report, but we haven't actually made that decision yet. So timing-wise, we're going to be passing the rate budget before we finalize the actual DC exemptions. So is there a risk that if we change what those recommended DC exemptions are, how will that then be funded? Will that go to levy instead of rate?
So through the chair, through the DC Stakeholder Committee and Audit, Finance, and Admin Committee, with the changes to the development charges, our bylaw, and the related DC exemptions, that comes into play in June of 2024. So with this budget having to be approved in early January. We're making some assumptions in the budget about the DC exemptions, and we're basically maintaining around the $37 million. So we expect that to change, but not until we know those final numbers and get the feedback through the public session at Audit, Finance, and Admin will we know those final numbers.
Okay, thank you. And I think that's just really important for committee to understand that essentially we're making a decision in principle to support the recommended DC exemption elimination. That's already moving forward, but that won't be finished until months after we're done the actual budget. Anyway, that's my only question. I will take the chair back. I see no further speakers on the speakers list. So with that, then, we will receive both of the staff presentations. So I need a mover and a seconder to receive the presentations for item 5.1. Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Kassar. All in favor or opposed? And that carries unanimously. Now, on the report, just to put this on the floor, and then we'll make a decision if we're going to proceed today or not. Moved by Councillor Wang, seconded by Councillor Alex Wilson. Discussion on the report. We'll go to Councillor Crutch, just because I'm seeing him raise his hand first.
Thanks. So I had some broad points to make on the report. I could support approving this today and understanding the comments that Councillor Clark and Councillor Danko have made. I have three things I wanted to just refer to, and I'll say this right now. I'm going to bring these forward later in the budget process at the very end, hopefully lean toward the 2025 process, but want to signal that nice and early. There are three things I think that are really important as part of these budget processes. Firstly, I really appreciate the context that was provided in terms of why we're spending the money we're spending, what that's going to lead to in terms of future savings. And I think that everyone's done a great job of clarifying the context. We've had over 100 pages of slides, so I think we get the point, and I think the public will be able to refer to those materials. That being said, I think they have to be much clearer than they are. I think right now we're still caught up in language that I think is for us in the room and for us in the building. And I think a simplified way of approaching this, which I suggested last year around calling it the water budget, would allow a lot more people to engage in the process, because for most people, the rate budget doesn't mean anything to them. So these kinds of clarity things I hope to be able to bring forward as part of the 2025 process with everyone's support in terms of just clearer language and making this more accessible. Of course, the mayor sets all the tone for the budget, so I'll be heavily relying on her advice for that motion. Secondly, about equity, I would say. I think that it's been my experience in Ward 2, and I can't speak for other areas, but in the lower city, I've noticed in other places where there sometimes is an inequity around a use for an equity-seeking community. And we're not accounting for that in our budgeting. So I think it's important for departments and divisions to think about that. And also not just bring the analyses in-house, but tell us when. So maybe it's going to take a minute for us to figure that out. Maybe it will require us to get outside expertise. Maybe we have that staff inside. And I want to address one comment that was made, because I think it's really important for us all to consider equity and how we ask and talk about equity. When we rely on our professional planning staff to give us advice about planning, we recognize them as professionals in that field. We rely on our professional water staff to give us advice about water. We recognize they're professionals in our field. I would never turn to someone here who might have a professional water background to ask them for their advice. When we ask counselors to give their advice about equity, I think that sets up a problem. We have to be relying on professionals in the field of equity to be delving into these matters and bringing recommendations forward to council. Otherwise, it comes down to our own personal interpretations of what equity means, our own whims, our own priorities. And I don't think that can set the way that we address equity here. So as much as I appreciate the idea that we ought to be helping to inform that, I think we need to lean into this notion that there are professionals who do this work every single day and have been doing it for decades. They know what's up, they can give us advice, and if we don't have those people in-house, we either get them in-house or hire consultants to help us. So those are my thoughts on this process from day one, and otherwise, thanks very much for the presentations.
Thank you, Councillor. Going to Councillor Jackson, followed by Councillor Alex Wilson. Councillor Jackson.
Thanks, Budget Chair Danko. I'm just going to be brief. I'm not prepared to support this today. If there's a movement to defer this to at least another budget meeting, I would support that, but I'm going to throw out my ultimate desire. It kind of dovetails on, I believe, what Councillor Maureen Wilson had suggested, and I know she'll correct me if my memory is flawed, but she wasn't the only one, but I think she rightly said it was long overdue on the capital budget side to defer that from where we traditionally have made the decision on the capital budget, Budget Chair Danko, before Christmas, so that we could get on with the capital works, infrastructure works, road reconstruction before us. But she had suggested to align it so that we could see comprehensively the tax levy, the operating annual budget, and how the capital budget might impact. I'm going to follow along that alignment to tell you and tell my colleagues that my ultimate desire would be to defer this water rate budget so that it would align in 2024 in our January, February, March deliberations overall, as we're going to set the 24 tax levy increase so that I understand exactly, since this comes out of one pocket, regardless of what the title is, whether it's capital, whether it's operating, whether it's water rate, that individual homeowner, renter, landlord, business owner, don't try to complicate it for them, Budget Chair Danko. They know and will tell us it comes out of their sole single pocket, regardless of what the title of the program or the budget request is. So I would at least support a deferral if the majority wish to at least next Monday. If the majority wish to approve this today, obviously I'll be recorded as opposed. But even beyond Monday, I'm just putting my ultimate desire out there at this time. I'd love to see the water rate budget for the first time aligned comprehensively and in totality with whatever the operating budget discussions are going to be and the capital budget as well. Thank you, Budget Chair Danko.
Thank you, Councillor Jackson. On our speakers list, Councillor Alex Wilson.
Thank you. I just wanted to I didn't have questions on some of those details there, so waiting for the reports just to pass on an incredible thank you to staff. I think following this file as a first-term councillor over the past 12 months, seeing all the continuous improvement work going on in the water department, entering from a time of Sewergate, and then as well in our first week, we had more sewage spills, seeing how staff have been responding, gearing up. We just had the auditor report on how that response to spills is happening, and then hearing, I think, a lot of us came here with a very strong focus from community to clean up our waterways and get Hamilton's water system back on track. And I have full confidence in our Hamilton Water team in doing the work, but it's not overnight work. When we're dealing with 100-year-old pipes, they don't just magically get fixed. It's not just turning a switch. And I think what we're seeing here is it's a long, long road to undoing bad decision-making. It's a long, long road to undoing decision-making that was even made in a bad context. I heard throughout this presentation that we're excited about the $650 million from the Clean Water Agency. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out that's $450 million less than the federal government promised they would put in the Clean Water Agency, delivered years later into their term than they promised. We've talked a lot about how the province isn't stepping up to the plate when it comes to funding and the cost of Bill 23. And I also heard through GM Zegerick's answer earlier about the cost of those Bill 23 exemptions being about 5% of the 10% rate. From my perspective, Hamilton Water staff have done an incredible job of not only minimizing cost to ratepayer, using reserves pending the mayoral direction, as well as looking ahead and getting things back on track. I think the opportunity here is to focus as a council, focus on where the room is left to move. I don't think it's within Hamilton Water, it's at the province. And I think passing this budget quicker, whether it's next week, whether it's today, and then aligning our communications efforts, our efforts on what would be the impact if we got that funding. What would the water rate be after that? How could that be reduced with more provincial funding? I think it's really, really important we don't send mixed signals to our constituents. I, for one, am confident that this is the right rate plan. This is the right steps for our water system. If we need provincial funding to make it happen, we need provincial funding to make it happen. Let's not shy away from that. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. Seeing no further speakers, I will put myself then on the speakers list. Councillor Wilson, if you could take the chair.
Thank you.
Thank you. one of the themes that we've been talking about this entire first year of this term is the impact of provincial downloading on municipal finances. And this is the first time we're really seeing that have a very significant impact in a budget that we're actually being asked to pass. And I appreciate some of the clarification from General Manager Zagarek because, as others have stated, it's tricky to follow the numbers in the reports and the presentations. But if I'm understanding the impacts of the regulatory requirements of both Bill 23 in provincially mandated DC exemptions and the all other statutory provincially mandated DC exemptions, they're 5% and I believe around 3% respectively, so 8% in total. So effectively, the rate budget that we're about to pass, I believe, is somewhere in the order of around 8% is due to provincially mandated regulatory requirements, and only 2% around there is actually due to city-initiated requirements. So the city component, we are funding and we are using reserves and we're using debt financing in order to reduce that. But the bulk of the tax increase is because of provincially mandated policy. So I would like to make sure that we capture that on the actual tax bill and on the rate bill and the accompanying material that goes into the actual envelope to explain that to residents. So if we do follow through with approving this today, I would add an amendment V to the recommendations that essentially that staff quantify and confirm the component that is the provincially mandated component of the 10.04% and the city component, and that we actually spell that out on line items on the bill and in the communications material. So with that, I will take the chair back, and that is spurred a couple further questions. So we have Councillor McMeekin for a first time, and then we'll go back to Councillor Clark.
Thanks, Chair. For some reason, my signal to want to speak isn't working, but I appreciate being recognized. I think you're absolutely right. I think there needs to be a public accounting of some of the disparities that otherwise would go largely unnoticed. And I'm normally disinclined to pile on, to be frank, but sometimes you just got to stand up and declare why things are as they are. And I would just note particularly and predominantly because we have a provincial government that says things and then unsays things and then says them again and then unsays them again. And with respect to we're going to make you whole, I think that's happened. We've challenged it. We've been told, don't worry about it, we're going to do it, And I wouldn't be as hot to trot about this if that weren't the case, but when a senior level of government goes out of its way to provide some seeming assurance about financial aid, particularly when it's coupled with something that they admit in hindsight was a mistaken approach to begin with, I think that needs to be communicated clearly. And failure to do that ends up letting the, I shouldn't say it. No, I will. Letting the irresponsible party off the hook and those that are struggling realistically to come up with something honest and authentic, carrying a ball that they shouldn't have to carry all on their own. So thank you for your comments, Chair Danko. I don't always agree with you, but I certainly do on this one.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clark?
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask Mr. Zagaric, a question with regards to the expectations as to when we expect to see some of those funds start flowing from the province.
So through the chair, specific to Building Faster Fund, I believe the timelines is the provincial government is targeting end of this calendar year, so December or as late as January, and some of those funds will be retroactive to 2023 into 2024. Beyond the Building Faster Fund, I do understand there is some other limited provincial funding that is being developed with respect to water, wastewater, and stormwater municipal projects. However, my understanding, those are very limited dollars, and in terms of magnitude, would not be significant for the city of Hamilton when relating it to a $4.1 billion 10-year investment plan.
Can I ask what is I don't know how else to describe it, but the deadline for us to have everything in place to be sent out to the ratepayers so that they know what the new rates are going to be for water? Do we have a threshold or a timeline that we have to get this approved by?
So through the chair, I'm not sure if Director McMullen's team have coordinated with Electra being our billing agent. I'll make an assumption here. If we wanted to realize a 2024 rate effective January 1st, 2024, what the deadline would be in order for us to provide the information to Electra so that they can develop the billing for 2024.
Yeah, so through the chair, staff is in contact with Electra. So if the rates are approved, then it's a relatively smooth process. If something happens and we have to have extra meetings and then the rates are changed, either way, up or down, then that requires a little more time for Electra to make the changes that they need for us to do whatever we need to do with the bill insert and run that through our printer. So we need a little bit of, we need probably a good few weeks by the time council approves it to when the changes are needed by Electra and the bill printer.
Is there a potential, Chair, to Mr. Zagaric, that the 4 million and change that you estimated, is there the potential that that value is going to be higher, that we will see more money coming from the province?
Through the chair, there's always a potential. I wouldn't be hopeful, as I understand the methodology is it's fairly straightforward. $200 million less a year, less 10% for northern communities and rural communities. So that leaves the balance, $180 million to be split by other eligible municipalities. And again, it's based on the housing target. So the simple math is $180 million and factoring in our housing target of 4,700 units, that represents about 3% of the overall provincial target. So we just take 3% of $180 million, and that's how we arrive at approximately $12 million in total, 4.55 on the rate budget, the balance being reflected on the tax budget.
Okay, I understand that. Thank you very much for that clarification. So, Mr. Chairman, your amendment, I think, is prudent. I think it's always important that we be transparent, especially on costs on the water rate or our actual levy costs to taxpayers. I would like to ask the committee to defer the decision over the weekend so that I can go through the numbers again. And if there's no one else that's interested in that, then I'll simply vote against what's before us today. So do you wish me to move that motion to defer for until when's the next budget meeting is Monday?
It's a week Monday, 27th, I believe. Yeah. And we do have the mayor on the speakers list, so I'll go to the mayor and then I'll come back to you for a potential deferral, and then we'll go from there.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate that.
Thanks very much, Chair. I appreciate that. I'm not going to speak in a lengthy way about the idea that we would put some kind of identifier on the bill. This is something that other mayors and other municipalities are also looking to do. In fact, I think Guelph is calling it the PILL. Maybe it's a bitter PILL, but it stands for Provincial Initiatives Local Levy, which is pretty clear that it's a provincial initiative that's being funded from the local levy. So I think we do have an opportunity to do that. I think other communities are facing and grappling with the same kinds of pressures that are coming from decisions that have been made provincially. And I would just say that I find it a bit frustrating that we're trying to catch up on our infrastructure needs. Some of that's driven by legislative requirements because of asset management legislation that I think was the right thing for the province to do. But you can't ask us to do that heavy lifting and then abandon us in our time of need when it comes to some of the supports necessary to enable us to successfully undertake that work. So I do want to say I agree with the motion or the amendment that the chair is bringing forward. It's something I've been talking to the staff about as well, and I look forward to actually passing this particular initiative as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. So no further speakers on the speakers list. So I'll come back to you, Councillor Clark, for direction to defer until the next rate budget committee meeting, which is November 27th.
That sounds like the motion. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. And is there a seconder? Councillor Taddison? Okay. So direction is on the floor. Is there any discussion on the direction? Not seeing. Okay, so Councillor Cassar wave first, and then I'll go to Councillor Taddison. Councillor Cassar?
Yeah, thanks, Chair Danko. I'll support it. I think I had a good enough understanding to move forward today, but I would like us to be able to move forward, hopefully unanimously, so it would afford colleagues the extra time to ask questions so we can do that on Monday if required. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Taddison?
And also just a question to staff, if they'd have that, if they would be able to have that information on the PIL amendment more thoroughly explained to us and shown to us what it exactly would look like. Is that are we able to get that?
Through the chair, we can work with Hamilton Water to further break down and investigate what are some of the provincial impacts in terms of our budget. We spent a fair amount of time discussing development charge exemptions, but Director Winters highlighted an example where the provincial government changed rules around locates and provided no corresponding funding. Similar may be excess soils, so we'll work with Hamilton Water in terms of identifying those factors, and then we'll have to work with Electra with respect to what a bill layout may look like in terms of including this information. I don't know that we will have that information for Monday. That would likely be a body of work that we would continue to develop leading up to the first billings in the new year.
I'm just always resistant to passing something that I don't know what it's going to look like and what my residents are going to read and see without having a more fulsome understanding of what we're putting in front of them. So thank you, and I will be supporting the deferral.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor McMeekin?
I wanted to make some generic comments about water. If you would allow me a little bit of, I've been doing some reading from the World Bank, and I think it may just, I want to address this to the staff because I really appreciate the work that you've been doing here. I think we take water for granted. We're blessed to be that part of the world that has access to about 21% of the world's fresh water, which is only 5%. There are wars being fought right now over food and water wherever we go. And the World Bank tells us that even though 75% of the globe is covered by water, unless you've got very expensive desalination processes, it's not readily accessible. They also suggest, and I found this amazing statistic, that for every single dollar worldwide from the World Bank that's invested on access and the sanitation of water, the results in about a $7 payback. And that if the world was to dedicate 1% of its gross domestic product, 1% globally, there would be nobody in the world without access to water. We wouldn't have to fight wars over water and such. I was also surprised to learn that the agricultural sector is the single largest consumer of water. I would not have thought that, although if you stop to think about it, it makes some sense. And that for every day, the meal that we eat requires, a single meal requires 2,000 to 5,000 liters of water to produce. So water is a precious, precious resource. There's no higher priority. You're not going to hear me talk like this around the basic tax base, but on the water, I'm ready, whether we defer it or not, to support getting on with that job, because if we don't take advantage and be good stewards of the water that we're blessed to have access to, then you know, there's something really wrong. And I think around this horseshoe, we all want to be good stewards. And I think this is the kind of thing that it's hard news, but it's news that we can readily educate and sell consumers on, because I think they get it for $7-something a week to have fresh, clean, drinkable water, when all you got to do is watch the news at night to see how many people don't have access to that. Anyhow, I just wanted to get that on the record for what it's worth. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor. I'm not seeing any further speakers, so then we will vote on the deferral. And just sorry.
My apologies. I thought you were calling the vote, so I put it up, but I've called it back.
I was about to call the vote, but I was just going to clarify on the amendment that if the deferral passes, then I will just put the amendment on as a notice of motion, because there's no point in us passing it today. If the deferral fails, then I will put it on as an actual amendment. So we are going to vote on the deferral. The question's been called. It's moved by Councillor Clark, seconded by Councillor Tattison, to defer consideration of the rate budget to Monday, November 27th. All in favor or opposed? That carries 11-5. So skipping ahead then, we have additional item on this agenda for Electra on item 6.1. This is the Electra Utilities Water, Wastewater, and Storm 2023 Service Activity Report. I need a mover and a seconder to put item 6.1 on the floor. Moved by Councillor Alex Wilson, seconded by Councillor Cassar. Is there any discussion on item 6.1? Seeing none, in that case, we will vote. Please indicate your vote now.
Councillor Bowles, are you able to vote?
And that carries unanimously. On notices of motion, so that amending motion will be a notice of motion. I did email you the text, so that'll go on as a motion at the 27th meeting, or an amending motion, or whatever.
So sorry, through the chair, it'll just be an amendment to the recommendations of the
Amendment to the
report.
recommendations.
Yeah. Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you. And I believe that we can go to adjournment. Moved by Councillor Tattison, seconded by Councillor Jackson. All in favor? And Councillor Wilson didn't have to use a single pen. Yes, so we do have the continuation of the recessed GIC meeting from last week. So are we going to break for till 1:30? Okay, yeah, that sounds good. And then we'll reconvene for a separate meeting. So if you're online, you need to log out and log back into a new meeting. Anyway,
For 1:30 start time.
for
Thank
1:30
you.
start time. Okay, thank you.
Angela, that was the leftover